"You're not what I expected," he said, and in that moment, Emma Lark knew her carefully constructed lies were about to unravel. She'd come to Copper Creek as a mail-order bride, desperate to escape a past that hunted her like a shadow. Will Carver had promised safety in his letters, but the man standing before her wore a marshal's badge she hadn't anticipated, and secrets had a way of surfacing in small western towns. Their story was about to ignite like wildfire across the prairie. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far our story travels across this wild world. The train's whistle cut through the afternoon heat like a knife through butter, announcing its arrival with a scream that echoed off the rust-colored hills surrounding Copper Creek. Emma Lark pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the small frontier town materialize through the dust and steam, a collection of wooden buildings that looked like they'd been dropped carelessly onto the prairie and left to fend for themselves against the relentless wind. Her heart hammered against her ribcage, each beat a reminder of the lies folded carefully in her carpetbag. The letters. The promises. The woman she'd pretended to be for the past 6 months, writing to a man she'd never met, crafting a version of herself that was softer, gentler, more suitable for a rancher's wife. What have I done? The thought had plagued her for the entire 3-day journey from St. Louis, growing louder with each mile that separated her from her old life. But there was no going back now. Behind her lay ruin and danger, a gambling debt her late father had left like a curse, men with cold eyes who'd made it clear they'd collect one way or another, and a city that had chewed her up and spit her out with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate plan. The train lurched to a stop, and Emma steadied herself against the seat. Through the window, she could see the platform, rough-hewn planks that had weathered countless seasons, a faded sign that read Copper Creek Station in peeling paint, and a handful of people waiting in the shade of the overhang. One man stood apart from the others. Even from this distance, Emma could tell he was the one. Will Carver, her husband-to-be. He stood with a stillness that suggested either patience or resignation, his hat held in work-roughened hands, his gaze fixed on the train with an intensity that made her stomach clench. "Last stop, miss," the conductor said, appearing beside her seat with a kindly smile that crinkled the corners of his weathered eyes. "Copper Creek. You got someone meeting you?" Emma swallowed hard, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Yes, my fiancé." The word felt foreign on her tongue, a lie wrapped in truth. They were engaged, in the technical sense, bound by letters and promises and a desperation that had driven her to answer an advertisement in the St. Louis Gazette. Honest rancher seeking wife, must be of good character, willing to work hard and ready to build a life in the Western Territories. No triflers or gold diggers need apply. She'd laughed when she first read it, a bitter, hollow sound in her empty boarding house room. Good character. If he only knew. But desperation had a way of silencing conscience, and Emma had penned her response that very night, carefully omitting the parts of her story that would have sent any sensible man running. She told him about her love of literature, her skill with a needle, her dreams of a quiet life away from the city's chaos. All true, in their way. She just hadn't mentioned the debts, the threats, the fact that she was running for her life as much as running toward a new one. Now, as she gathered her belongings and prepared to step off the train, Emma caught her reflection in the window glass. Dark hair pinned severely under a simple bonnet, hazel eyes that had seen too much for her 24 years, a dress that was respectable but showed its age in the carefully mended seams. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman with nowhere else to go. The other passengers had already disembarked by the time Emma made her way to the door, her carpetbag clutched in one hand, the other gripping her skirts to keep them from the dusty floor. The conductor offered his hand to help her down, and she took it, stepping out into the Colorado afternoon. The heat hit her first, dry and relentless, so different from the humid summers of St. Louis. Then came the smell, dust and sage, wood smoke and horse, the peculiar scent of a frontier town that existed on the edge of civilization. The platform creaked under her boots as she stood there, suddenly frozen, unable to make her feet carry her forward. Will Carver was walking toward her. Up close, he was nothing like the man she'd conjured in her imagination during those long nights writing letters by candlelight. She'd pictured someone softer somehow, despite his descriptions of ranch work and hard living. But the man approaching her now moved with a kind of controlled power, his shoulders broad beneath a worn cotton shirt, his face weathered by sun and wind into hard planes and angles that might have been handsome if they weren't so severe. And then there was the badge. It caught the sunlight as he moved, a small star of metal pinned to his chest, just visible beneath the edge of his vest. A marshal's badge. Emma's blood turned to ice. No, 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 no. He hadn't mentioned being a lawman, not once in 6 months of correspondence. He'd written about his ranch, his cattle, the land he'd worked to build into something worth having. He'd written about loneliness and hope, about wanting a partner to share the burden and the beauty of frontier life. But never, not once, had he mentioned wearing a badge. Marshal. The very word sent panic skittering down her spine like spiders. Marshals asked questions. Marshals had connections, telegraphs that could send messages back east, ways of finding out about gambling debts, and the kind of men who collected them with brass knuckles and quiet threats. Marshals represented exactly the kind of law and order Emma had been trying to escape. She must have made some sound, a gasp or a whimper, because Will Carver's steps faltered. He was close enough now that she could see his eyes, gray as a winter sky, sharp with intelligence, and something else she couldn't quite name. Disappointment, maybe, or recognition of his own. They stood there, 3 feet apart on the weathered platform, and Emma felt the weight of every lie she'd ever told pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. He spoke first, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. Emma Lark? It took her 2 tries to make her voice work. Yes, Mr. Carver, I presume? Something flickered across his face, an emotion gone too quickly to identify. His gaze traveled over her, taking in details she couldn't hide. The mended dress, the worn carpet bag, the way she held herself like a woman ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. When his eyes met hers again, they were guarded, careful. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. The words stung more than they should have. Emma lifted her chin, calling on every scrap of pride she had left. The afternoon sun blazed behind him, turning his outline into shadow, making it impossible to read his expression clearly. But she could hear everything he hadn't said in those 6 words. The disappointment, the second-guessing, the realization that the woman he'd been writing to existed only in carefully crafted letters. Neither are you, she replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. A marshal. Of all the terrible luck, she'd bound herself to a man whose very profession meant scrutiny, questions, the kind of attention she couldn't afford. The urge to turn around, to climb back onto that train and disappear into the vast American landscape nearly overwhelmed her. But the train was already pulling away, its whistle shrieking one last goodbye, and there was nowhere left to run. Will's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He settled his hat back on his head, the gesture somehow final, like a decision being made. "Wagons this way," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Ranch is about an hour's ride." He reached for her carpet bag, and Emma's fingers tightened reflexively on the handle. Everything she owned in the world was in that bag, including the letters she should have burned but couldn't quite bring herself to destroy, letters that proved she'd lied about so many things. "I can manage it," she said, more sharply than she intended. Will's hand dropped back to his side. "Suit yourself." He turned and started walking, clearly expecting her to follow. Emma glanced around the platform one last time, as if the landscape might offer some alternative, some escape from the choice she'd already made. But there was only Copper Creek, a handful of buildings shimmering in the heat, and beyond them, the endless prairie stretching toward mountains that looked close enough to touch, but were probably days away. This was the edge of the world, the place where civilization thinned to almost nothing, where a woman alone would last about as long as a snowflake in July. She followed. The wagon was old but well-maintained, hitched to a pair of horses that looked equally work-worn and cared for. Will loaded her bag into the back with an efficiency that spoke of long practice, then offered his hand to help her up. Emma hesitated only a moment before taking it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip as he steadied her onto the bench. He climbed up beside her, the wagon creaking under his weight, and took up the reins. With a click of his tongue, the horses started forward, pulling them away from the station and into the town proper. Copper Creek was exactly what Emma had expected, which was to say, not much. A wide main street of packed dirt, lined with the essential buildings of frontier commerce, a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith's forge sending up sparks, and the ring of hammer on anvil, a small church with a steeple that listed slightly to one side. People moved along the boardwalks, pausing to watch the wagon pass with the kind of frank curiosity that made Emma's skin prickle. "They're staring," she murmured, keeping her eyes forward. "Small town," Will replied, his attention on the road ahead. "Strangers always news. By tomorrow, everyone will know I collected my mail-order bride from the station." The term made her flinch. Mail-order bride. It sounded so transactional, so desperate. Which, she supposed, was exactly what it was. A business arrangement dressed up in the language of courtship. She'd known that when she answered his advertisement, had accepted it as the price of escape. But hearing it spoken aloud made it feel more real, more permanent. "About that," Emma said, gathering her courage. "You didn't mention being a marshal. In your letters." Will's hands tightened slightly on the reins, the only sign he'd heard her. They were passing the edge of town now, the buildings giving way to open land dotted with sage and the occasional hardy tree. "Didn't seem important," he said finally. "It's just a job." "It's not just a job," Emma countered. "It's—" She caught herself before she could say too much, reveal too much. "It's dangerous. So's ranching." He glanced at her sidelong, and Emma felt the weight of his scrutiny like a physical touch. "You scared of lawmen, Miss Lark?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications Emma couldn't afford to examine too closely. "I'm scared of a lot of things, Mr. Carver," she said carefully. "Seems to me that's just common sense out here." Something that might have been approval flickered in his expression. "Fair enough." He returned his attention to the road, and Emma felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds, the creak of the wagon, the steady clip-clop of hooves, and the whisper of wind through the grass. The prairie spread out around them like an ocean, endless and overwhelming, beautiful in a way that made Emma's chest ache. She'd spent her whole life in cities, surrounded by buildings and noise, and people pressed together in desperate proximity. This vast emptiness should have terrified her, but instead she felt something unexpected, a strange kind of peace, as if she could finally breathe after years of holding her breath. "It's beautiful," she said softly, more to herself than to him. Will turned to look at her, and this time his expression was less guarded, almost surprised. "You think so? Most women from back east find it desolate, lonely." "I am from back east," Emma replied, meeting his gaze, "and it is lonely, but that doesn't mean it isn't beautiful." For a long moment they simply looked at each other, and Emma saw something shift in Will's eyes, a reassessment perhaps, or the beginning of curiosity. Then he turned away, clearing his throat roughly. "Ranch is just over the next rise," he said. "It's not much, but it's mine. Ours," he corrected, the word awkward in his mouth. "If you decide to stay." If. Emma latched onto that word like a lifeline. It suggested choice, the possibility of escape if things went wrong, but it also suggested that Will Carver was as uncertain about this arrangement as she was, that maybe, just maybe, he had his own reasons for seeking a wife through the impersonal columns of a newspaper advertisement. The wagon crested the rise, and Emma got her first look at what would be her home. The ranch house sat in a shallow valley, sheltered from the worst of the prairie wind by a curve of the land. It was small, maybe 4 rooms, Emma guessed, built of rough-hewn timber that had weathered to a silvery gray. The roof needed work. She could see missing shingles from here. One of the porch posts listed at an angle, and the steps looked treacherous. Behind the house stood a barn in slightly better condition, a chicken coop, and a few outbuildings she couldn't identify. It was, as Will had said, not much, but it was also clearly loved, in a rough frontier way. Someone had planted wildflowers along the porch, scraggly things, but blooming bravely in the harsh climate. The yard was swept clean, and she could see where attempts had been made to repair the porch railing with fresh lumber. It was the home of a man who worked hard, who did his best with what he had. "Like I said," Will's voice was defensive now, "it's not fancy. I've been meaning to make improvements, but between the ranch and the marshal work, there's not much time for— It's fine, Emma interrupted, and was surprised to find she meant it. It's honest work, honest living. That's more than a lot of people have. Will pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and set the brake. He didn't move to get down immediately, just sat there staring at the house as if seeing it through her eyes. Your letters made you sound softer, he said quietly. More delicate. I expected someone who'd take one look at this place and burst into tears. Emma's laugh came out bitter. I'm sorry to disappoint you. Didn't say I was disappointed. Will finally turned to face her fully, and Emma found herself trapped by the intensity of his gaze. Just said you're not what I expected. Neither of us are, seems like. Question is, what do we do about it? It was a fair question, one Emma didn't have an answer for. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to ask him to take her back to town, to find some other way forward that didn't involve lying to a lawman every day for the rest of her life. But intelligence and safety were luxuries she couldn't afford, not with Victor Maddox's hired thugs probably already on her trail, not with nowhere else to go and winter coming on. We try, she said finally. We made promises in those letters, even if we weren't entirely honest about who we were. Seems to me we owe it to ourselves to see if we can make something real out of them. Will studied her for a long moment, and Emma forced herself to hold his gaze, to let him see whatever he needed to see to make this work. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and decisive. All right then, he said. Let's try. He climbed down from the wagon and came around to her side, offering his hand again. This time, when Emma took it, it felt different. Not just assistance, but a kind of compact, a sealing of the bargain they'd just made. His hand was warm and solid, and for just a moment, Emma let herself imagine what it might be like to have someone solid and steady in her corner, someone who didn't demand more than she could give. Then her feet touched the ground, and reality reasserted itself. She was Emma Lark, or at least that was the name she was using now. She was a liar and a fugitive, bound to a lawman by desperate circumstance and carefully constructed fiction. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was survival, pure and simple. Will retrieved her carpet bag from the wagon bed and gestured toward the house. I'll show you around, then get the horses settled. There's a room upstairs you can use. I've been sleeping down here, so there's no need to worry about— Well, he cleared his throat again, color rising in his weathered cheeks. We'll figure out those arrangements as we go. Emma felt her own face heat. In all her desperate planning, she hadn't thought much beyond escaping St. Louis. The reality of what marriage meant, even an unconsummated one, hit her now with the force of a physical blow. She was expected to share this man's life, his home, eventually his bed. The thought made her throat tight with something between fear and an emotion she couldn't name. That's very considerate, she managed, just practical. Will started toward the house, and Emma followed, taking in more details with each step. The porch creaked alarmingly under their weight. The front door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. But inside the house was clean, Spartan, and clearly the domain of a man living alone, but swept and dusted with a care that spoke of discipline, if not domesticity. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a cast-iron stove in one corner, a rough-hewn table with two mismatched chairs, and a worn armchair positioned near the fireplace. Hooks by the door held Will's coat and gun belt. Seeing the pistol sent another jolt of anxiety through Emma's system. Lawmen carried guns for a reason. Kitchen's basic but functional, Will was saying, gesturing around the space. Pumps out back for water. I've got chickens for eggs, and there's usually decent hunting this time of year. Root cellars stocked for winter, but we'll need to put up more vegetables before the frost comes. He led her through a doorway to show her a small bedroom, barely large enough for the single bed and dresser it contained. His room, she realized, noting the masculine clothes folded neatly on the dresser, the gun oil and cleaning supplies beside them, the Bible on the small bedside table. This is, she gestured vaguely. My room. Was my room, Will corrected. Yours now if you want it. I can sleep in the main room easy enough. Used to it from my marshal days, sleeping where I can. They climbed the narrow staircase to the upper floor, which was little more than a loft divided in half. One side held storage, trunks and boxes, spare lumber, Things accumulated over years of frontier living. The other side had been set up as a bedroom, with a brass bed frame that had seen better days, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the prairie. "It's quieter up here," Will said, setting her carpetbag on the bed. "More private. I thought, well, I thought you might like that." Emma walked to the window, looking out at the vast expanse of land painted gold by the lowering sun. Private. Yes, she would need that. Space to think, to plan, to figure out how to maintain her carefully constructed lies in such close quarters with a man whose job was uncovering truth. "It's perfect," she said, and this time she wasn't lying. Will shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with domestic arrangements and emotional territory. "I'll leave you to settle in, then. There's water in the pitcher, and I'll bring up some more after I tend the horses. Dinner's usually simple. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage beans and cornbread, keep us from starving." "I can cook," Emma heard herself say. "It's one of the things I told you that was actually true. I'm a fair hand in the kitchen." Something eased in Will's expression. Relief, maybe, that at least some of what she'd written hadn't been fabricated. "That would be welcome. Supplies are in the kitchen. Help yourself to whatever you need." He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly filling the frame. "Emma," he said, not looking at her, "I know this isn't what either of us thought we were getting into, but I meant what I said in my letters, the honest parts anyway. I'm looking for a partner, not a servant, someone to build something with. If you can't be that, if you're just looking for an escape, well, I'd rather know now than find out later when it hurts more." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw, in a way that made Emma's chest constrict. She wanted to tell him the truth, that yes, she was looking for an escape, that she'd lied about almost everything, that she was using him as a shield against a past that would destroy her if it caught up. But the words stuck in her throat, trapped behind layers of self-preservation and fear. "I'll try to be what you need," she said instead, which was perhaps the most honest thing she'd said since stepping off that train. Will nodded slowly, still not looking at her. "That's all anyone can ask, I suppose. We'll make do, one way or another." Then he was gone, his boots heavy on the stairs, the front door opening and closing with a sound of finality that made Emma sink onto the edge of the bed. She was here. She'd actually done it, fled halfway across the country to marry a stranger, to start a life built on lies and desperation. The insanity of it all crashed over her like a wave, and for a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the enormity of what she'd set in motion. Emma pressed her hands to her face, feeling the tears that wanted to come but wouldn't. She'd cried herself dry weeks ago when she'd realized there was no other way out. Now there was only forward, only survival, only the slim hope that maybe somehow she could make this work long enough to truly disappear into this vast frontier. Through the window, she could see Will crossing the yard toward the barn, his stride purposeful and strong. A marshal and a rancher, alone out here at the edge of civilization. What had driven him to seek a wife through advertisement? What loneliness or desperation had made him willing to bind himself to a stranger based on nothing more than carefully worded letters and hope? They were both running, she realized, both hiding in their own ways. The difference was that Will's secrets probably wouldn't get him killed. Emma stood and began unpacking her meager belongings, hanging the 2 spare dresses she owned in the small wardrobe, arranging her brush and mirror on the washstand. At the bottom of the carpet bag, wrapped in a piece of silk, were the letters. His letters, the ones she should have destroyed but couldn't. She'd read them so many times she practically had them memorized. "Dear Miss Lark," the first one had begun, his handwriting neat and careful. "I received your response to my advertisement, and I confess myself both surprised and pleased. A woman who appreciates Hawthorne and can quote Emerson is a rarity in these parts. I would very much like to continue this correspondence." They'd grown more personal from there, trading thoughts on books and philosophy, on dreams and disappointments. He'd written about the loneliness of frontier life, the way silence could be both blessing and curse. She'd responded with carefully edited truths, sharing her love of learning, her frustration with society's limitations on women, her desire for a life that meant something beyond social obligations and empty promises. And somewhere in those months of letters, something had shifted. What had started as a desperate plan had become almost real, the imagined connection with this man she'd never met, the hope that maybe she could actually build the life she'd been pretending to want. But that was before she'd seen the badge, before she'd realized that the one place she'd thought to find safety might actually be the most dangerous place of all. A knock on the doorframe made her jump. Will stood there, a bucket of water in his hand, his expression carefully neutral. "Thought you might want to wash up before dinner," he said. "Thank you." Emma took the bucket, careful not to let their hands touch this time. "I'll be down shortly to start cooking." Will nodded but didn't move, his gray eyes searching her face as if trying to puzzle out a difficult problem. "Can I ask you something?" Emma's heart stuttered. "Of course." "Why'd you come here? Really?" The question was gentle, but underneath it, Emma heard the lawman, trained to detect lies, to uncover truth. "I know what you wrote in your letters, but standing here now, looking at you, I keep thinking there's more to it. Something you're not saying." For a wild moment, Emma considered telling him everything, about her father's gambling debts, about Victor Maddox and his cold-eyed collectors, about the threat that had sent her running, but fear closed her throat, trapped the words before they could form. "I wanted a different life," she said carefully. "The city was suffocating me. I wanted space, freedom, a chance to be something other than what society expected. That much was true." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either, and Emma saw Will weighing her words, deciding whether to push or let it rest. "Fair enough," he said finally. "We've all got reasons for the choices we make. Long as you're here honest, long as you mean to try, that's good enough for me." He turned to leave again, then paused. "One more thing. I'm the marshal of Copper Creek and 3 surrounding townships. It means I'm gone sometimes, chasing down outlaws or settling disputes. When I'm gone, you're alone out here. You know how to shoot?" Emma shook her head. "Then I'll teach you. Tomorrow, after the morning chores. Out here, being able to defend yourself isn't optional. It's survival, for women especially." "All right," Emma agreed, though the thought of holding a gun, of learning to use it, sent a chill down her spine. Will studied her a moment longer, then nodded and headed back downstairs. Emma listened to his boots on the wooden floor, the sound of him moving through the house he'd lived in alone for who knew how long. She poured water from the bucket into the wash basin and splashed her face, letting the cool liquid wash away the dust and sweat of travel. In the small mirror above the washstand, her reflection stared back, pale and drawn, eyes too large in a face sharpened by stress and fear. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "You have to do this." Because the alternative was unthinkable. Going back meant Victor Maddox, meant the kind of debt that could only be paid in blood or worse. It meant the end of everything, including hope. Emma dried her face and straightened her dress, running her hands over the fabric to smooth the wrinkles. Then she headed downstairs to begin her new life, one careful lie at a time. The kitchen was indeed basic, but Will had been truthful about the supplies. The root cellar held potatoes, onions, carrots, and dried beans. There was flour and cornmeal, salt pork, and a few precious tins of preserved tomatoes. Not abundance, but enough. More than enough by Emma's standards. She set to work with practiced efficiency, her hands finding comfort in familiar tasks. Chopping vegetables, stoking the fire in the cast iron stove, measuring flour for biscuits. Cooking had always been a refuge for her, one of the few skills her mother had insisted she learn before consumption had taken her, leaving Emma alone with a father who loved cards more than his daughter. Will came in as she was sliding the pan of biscuits into the oven, carrying an armload of firewood. He stopped short, surprise flickering across his features as he took in the scene. The pot of stew simmering on the stove, the table set with mismatched plates, the smell of baking bread beginning to fill the small house. "You work fast," he said. Emma shrugged. "Idle hands and all that. Besides, I was hungry." "When's the last time you ate?" The question caught her off guard. "Yesterday morning, I think. On the train." Will's jaw tightened. "Should have thought to offer you something at the station. Sorry." "You didn't know." Emma stirred the stew, not looking at him. "We're strangers, remember? Still figuring each other out." "Suppose that's true." He stacked the firewood beside the stove, then washed his hands in the basin. "Smells good. Been a long time since this house had real cooking in it. They sat down to eat in awkward silence, the scrape of spoons against plates the only sound. The food was good. Emma had always had a knack for making something decent out of simple ingredients, but it sat heavy in her stomach, weighed down by nerves and the surreal reality of sharing a meal with her husband-to-be. "How long have you been a marshal?" she asked finally, needing to fill the silence. 3 years. Took over when old Marshal Daniels retired. Before that, I was just ranching, trying to make this place work. Will broke apart a biscuit, steam rising from the center. Marshal work pays steady, which helps when the cattle don't. Figured I could do both, at least until... Until what? He met her eyes across the table. Until I had a reason to stay put. A family, maybe. Something worth being home for. The implication hung between them, heavy with expectation and hope, and all the ways Emma was already failing to be what he needed. She looked down at her plate, unable to hold his gaze. "The badge," she said carefully. "Does it mean you're always on duty, always watching?" Will was quiet for a long moment. When Emma risked a glance up, he was studying her with that same penetrating intensity that made her feel transparent, as if he could see right through to all her carefully hidden secrets. "It means I uphold the law," he said finally. "Keep the peace. Protect people who need protecting. But I'm not a man who goes looking for trouble where there isn't any, if that's what you're asking." It was, and it wasn't. Emma wanted to know if he'd investigate her past, if he'd start asking questions she couldn't answer. But she couldn't ask that directly without raising the very suspicions she was trying to avoid. "I'm just trying to understand what life will be like here," she said instead. "What I'm getting into." "Honest answer?" Will leaned back in his chair, firelight playing across his features. "Life here is hard. Winters are brutal. The work never ends. And yes, sometimes my marshal duties take me away from the ranch, sometimes into dangerous situations. But I've stayed alive this long by being careful and smart. I don't take unnecessary risks." "And what about me?" The question came out smaller than Emma intended. "What are the risks for me?" Will's expression softened slightly. "I won't lie to you. Being a marshal's wife isn't safe. There are men who'd use you to get to me if they thought they could. That's part of why I'll teach you to shoot, to defend yourself. But Emma, I promise you this. I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. That's not an empty promise. That's a vow." The sincerity in his voice made Emma's throat tight. Here was this man offering protection to someone who'd lied to him from the first word, promising to keep her safe when he had no idea what he was protecting her from. The guilt of it was almost unbearable. "What if—" she started, then stopped, unsure how to finish. "What if what?" Emma took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "What if I'm not who you think I am? What if the woman in those letters was an ideal I couldn't quite live up to?" Will was quiet, his gray eyes never leaving her face. Then, to her surprise, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Emma, I fought in the war. I've seen men at their worst and their best. I've learned that nobody is exactly who they seem at first glance. We're all carrying something, hiding something, trying to be better than we are." He paused. "I'm not asking for perfect. I'm just asking for honest effort. Can you give me that?" The question nearly broke her, because no, she couldn't give him honesty, not the kind he deserved. But effort? That at least she could offer. "Yes," she whispered. "I can try." "Then that's enough for now." Will stood, collecting the plates. "You cooked. I'll clean up. That seem fair?" Emma nodded, grateful for the chance to escape to her room, to process everything that had happened in this impossible day. But as she climbed the stairs, she heard Will's voice, quiet and thoughtful. "Emma, for what it's worth, you're not what I expected either, but maybe that's not such a bad thing." She didn't know how to respond, so she didn't. She just kept climbing, each step taking her farther from the life she'd fled and deeper into the uncertain future she'd chosen. In her room, Emma prepared for bed mechanically, her mind racing. Through the floorboards, she could hear Will moving around downstairs, the sound of dishes being washed, the creak of the floorboards as he banked the fire for the night. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, the kind of sounds she'd never thought to hear in her own home. She unpinned her hair and brushed it out, watching the moonlight paint silver patterns across the worn floorboards. Somewhere out there, beyond the prairie, beyond the mountains, Victor Maddox was probably still looking for her. Men like him didn't forgive debts, didn't forget faces. But here, in this small house at the edge of the world, Emma could almost believe she was safe. Almost. A soft knock on the doorframe made her turn. Will stood there, a quilt draped over one arm. "Nights get cold up here," he said, offering it to her. "This should help." Emma took the quilt, noting the careful stitching, the faded but still vibrant pattern. "Did you make this?" "My mother, before she passed." Will's voice was gruff with emotion he was trying to hide. "Seems fitting you should have it. Welcome to the family, such as it is." Before Emma could respond, he was gone, his footsteps retreating down the stairs. She heard the sound of him settling into what must be the armchair, the creak of old wood and leather. Emma spread the quilt over the bed, running her fingers over the stitches. A mother's love, sewn into fabric, given freely to a stranger who'd lied her way into this family. The gesture made her eyes burn with tears she couldn't shed. She climbed into bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would learn to shoot. Tomorrow she would start the daily work of maintaining this fragile deception. Tomorrow she would try to be the wife Will Carver needed, even as she carried secrets that could destroy them both. But tonight, in this moment, Emma let herself feel something she hadn't felt in months. A fragile, dangerous thing she barely recognized as hope. Dawn came soft and pink across the prairie, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that Emma had never seen in the city. She woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and the distant lowing of cattle, disoriented for a moment before memory flooded back. Colorado. The ranch. Will Carver and his marshal's badge, and all the lies she'd told to get here. She dressed quickly in the dim light, choosing her sturdier dress, the one that had seen better days but could withstand hard work. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned up her hair, and she paused to press her palms flat against the washstand, forcing herself to breathe slowly. One day at a time. That was all she had to manage. Just one day. Downstairs, she found Will already awake, standing at the stove with his back to her. The smell of coffee filled the small kitchen, dark and bitter, and somehow comforting. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and Emma caught a flash of something in his expression before he schooled it into neutrality. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. She couldn't tell. "Morning?" he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Coffee's ready. Figured you might need it after yesterday." "Thank you." Emma poured herself a cup, wrapping her hands around the warm tin. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but she drank it anyway, grateful for the heat and the kick of caffeine. "What time do you usually start the day?" "Sunup. Animals don't wait for a man to feel ready." Will moved to the door, shrugging into his coat. "I'll handle the livestock this morning. Give you time to settle in, find your bearings. But starting tomorrow, I'll teach you the routine. Can't have you sitting idle while there's work to be done." Emma bristled slightly at the assumption, though she knew it was fair. "I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Carver." "Will," he corrected, settling his hat on his head. "We're past formalities now, don't you think? And I didn't say you were afraid, just saying there's a learning curve to ranch life. No shame in that." He left before she could respond, the door closing with a soft click. Through the window, Emma watched him cross the yard to the barn, his stride purposeful in the early morning light. There was something almost graceful in the way he moved, despite his size, the economy of motion that came from years of hard physical work. She finished her coffee and set about exploring the kitchen more thoroughly, opening cupboards and drawers, taking inventory of what existed and what was needed. The supplies were basic but adequate. Will clearly knew how to keep himself fed, if not particularly well. She found a sourdough starter in a covered crock, still active despite what must have been weeks of neglect. At least she could make decent bread. Emma was elbow deep in mixing biscuit dough when Will returned, stomping his boots clean at the door. He paused when he saw her working, something unreadable crossing his face. "You don't have to cook every meal," he said. "I can manage." "So can I." Emma shaped the dough with practiced efficiency. "Besides, seems to me a partnership means sharing the load. You handle the livestock, I'll handle the kitchen. Fair trade." Will hung his hat on the hook, considering her words. "Fair enough, But there's more to running a ranch than cooking and feeding animals. I meant what I said about teaching you to shoot. After breakfast, if you're willing." The thought of holding a gun still made Emma's stomach clench, but she nodded. "I'm willing." They ate in companionable silence, the awkwardness of the previous night easing slightly. The biscuits were good, even Will admitted as much, in his spare way, and Emma felt a small swell of pride at the simple accomplishment. At least she could contribute something real to this arrangement. After the dishes were cleared, Will led her outside to a cleared area behind the barn. The morning had warmed slightly, but the air still held the crispness of high-altitude autumn. He'd set up a row of tin cans on a fence post, and he carried 2 guns, his service revolver and a smaller pistol that looked almost delicate in his large hands. "This was my mother's," he said, offering her the smaller gun. "22 caliber, good for learning, less kick than a .45. Emma took it gingerly, surprised by the weight. The metal was cool against her palm, the wooden grip worn smooth by years of use. "Your mother knew how to shoot?" "Had to. My father was gone a lot, freight hauling, then the war. She ran the homestead alone for months at a time with me just a boy. Couldn't afford not to know." Will moved behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him at her back. "Here, let me show you how to hold it properly." His hands covered hers, adjusting her grip, and Emma's breath caught. It was the most intimate contact they'd had, and despite everything, the lies, the fear, the strangeness of it all, she felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with anxiety. "Feet shoulder-width apart," Will instructed, his voice low near her ear. "Bend your knees slightly. You want a stable base. The gun's going to want to jump when you fire, so you need to be ready for it." Emma tried to focus on his words rather than his proximity, adjusting her stance as he directed. His hands were patient on hers, guiding but not forcing, and she could feel the calluses on his palms, evidence of years of hard labor. "Now, line up the sights," he continued. "Front sight, back sight, target. Keep both eyes open. I know that feels wrong, but you need the full field of vision. Breathe steady. When you're ready, squeeze the trigger slow. Don't jerk it." "All right." Emma sighted down the barrel, trying to line up the can, wavering in her vision. Her hands were shaking slightly, making it impossible to hold steady. Will's hands tightened over hers, steadying them. "You're nervous. That's normal. But fear makes you tense, and tension makes you miss. Take a breath. Let it out slow. Find the calm in the center of yourself." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, searching for that calm. It was hard to find with her heart hammering and Will's solid presence behind her and the weight of the gun in her hands, but she thought of the prairie at dawn, the vast quiet of it, and something in her settled slightly. "Good," Will murmured. "Now try." Emma opened her eyes, found the sight picture, and squeezed the trigger. The gun barked, a sharp crack that echoed across the prairie, and kicked back into her palm. The bullet went wide, kicking up dust 3 feet to the left of the fence post. But Emma barely noticed the miss. She was too caught up in the visceral shock of it, the noise, the recoil, the sudden understanding of the destruction this small piece of metal could unleash. "Not bad for a first shot," Will said, stepping back to give her space. "You didn't close your eyes or flinch. That's more than most people manage. Try again." Emma raised the gun, her hand steadier now that she knew what to expect. This time she took her time, breathing the way he'd taught her, finding that still place inside. When she squeezed the trigger, the can jumped. Not a direct hit, but close enough to clip the edge and send it spinning. "Better," Will said, and she could hear the approval in his voice. "Keep practicing. A full cylinder's worth, 6 shots. Get comfortable with the weight, the trigger pull. I'll be right here if you need me." Emma fired the remaining rounds, each shot feeling a little less foreign, a little more controlled. By the 6th shot, she actually hit a can dead center, the metallic clang of impact satisfying in a way she hadn't expected. "I hit it," she said, surprised by her own delight. Will smiled, a real smile, the first she'd seen from him, and it transformed his face completely. The hard lines softened, and his eyes crinkled at the corners, and for a moment Emma caught a glimpse of who he might have been before life had weathered him into stone. "You did," he agreed. "You've got steady hands and a good eye. With practice, you'll be better than decent." He showed her how to reload. The mechanics of opening the cylinder, ejecting the spent casings, pressing new rounds into the chambers. His patience surprised her. She'd expected a harder taskmaster, someone who would push and criticize. Instead, he taught the way a good teacher should, with calm instruction and genuine encouragement. They spent another hour practicing until Emma's hands were sore and her ears rang despite the cotton Will had given her to stuff in them. By the end, she was hitting the cans more often than not, and something in her had shifted. The gun no longer felt quite so foreign in her hands. It felt like a tool, like something she could control. "That's enough for today," Will finally said, taking the pistol from her and checking it with practiced ease. "You did well, better than I expected, honestly." "Because I'm a woman?" Emma asked, an edge of challenge in her voice. "Because you're from the city," Will corrected. "Most city folk, men or women, take to firearms like cats take to water. You've got natural talent, Emma. That's worth acknowledging." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Emma watched as Will cleaned both guns with the same meticulous care he seemed to bring to everything, his hands sure and steady on the oiled cloth. "Why did you really send for a wife?" The question slipped out before Emma could stop it. "A man like you, capable, with land and a steady job, you could have courted someone local. Why advertise for a stranger?" Will's hand stilled on the gun. For a long moment, he didn't speak, and Emma thought she'd overstepped, pushed too far too fast. But then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Same reason you answered the advertisement, I imagine," he said quietly. "Desperation of one kind or another." He set the gun down, meeting her eyes. "The war broke something in me, Emma. Made me hard in ways I don't much like. Women around here, they look at me and see the badge, the gun, the man who brings in outlaws, dead or alive. They don't see someone they want to build a life with. They see danger." "And you thought a stranger might not see that?" Emma asked softly. "I thought a stranger might be willing to look past it, to see whatever else there might be." He picked up the gun again, resuming his cleaning with deliberate focus. "Foolish, maybe, but loneliness makes fools of us all, eventually." Emma felt something crack in her chest, empathy she couldn't afford, understanding she had no right to feel. Because she was using his loneliness, his desperate hope for connection, to hide from her own demons. She was the worst kind of fraud. "I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't sure exactly what she was apologizing for. Will glanced at her, confusion flickering across his features. "What for?" "For not being what you hoped for. For being just another disappointment." "Who said you were a disappointment?" Will stood, tucking the clean guns into his belt. "You're different than I expected, sure. But disappointment? No. If anything, you're more than I expected. Stronger. That's worth something out here." He started back toward the house, leaving Emma standing in the yard with her thoughts churning. The morning sun had climbed higher, warming the air, and she could hear the sounds of the ranch, chickens clucking, cattle lowing, the wind sighing through the grass. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds, so different from the constant noise of the city. She was following Will back to the house when she heard it, the distant thunder of hoofbeats approaching fast. Will heard it too. He went still, his hand dropping instinctively to his gun, his whole body tensing in a way that spoke of long experience with danger. "Get inside," he said, his voice suddenly hard, all the softness of the morning gone. "Now." "What is it?" Emma asked, even as she moved toward the house. "Don't know yet, but anyone riding that hard either needs help or means trouble." Will's eyes scanned the horizon, tracking the sound. "Either way, you don't want to be caught in the open." Emma had just reached the porch when the rider came into view. A boy, no more than 16, hunched low over his horse's neck, riding like the devil himself was on his heels. He pulled up hard in the yard, his horse blowing and sweating, foam flecking its mouth. "Marshal Carver," the boy gasped, nearly falling from the saddle. "You gotta come quick. There's been a killing in town. Deputy Hayes sent me to fetch you." Will's face went grim. "Who's dead?" "Sam Porter, sir, the bank clerk. Found him this morning behind the saloon, throat cut ear to ear. Hayes says it looks like robbery, but there's something strange about it, something he wants you to see." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. A killing. Murder. Exactly the kind of thing that would bring scrutiny, questions, the kind of attention she couldn't afford. And Will would have to go. It was his job, his duty. "Saddle my horse," Will told the boy, then turned to Emma. "I have to go. Could be a few hours, could be all day. You'll be all right here?" "I'll manage," Emma said, though her voice sounded thin even to her own ears. Will studied her for a moment, and she wondered what he saw. Fear, certainly, but of what? Of being alone? Or of what his investigation might uncover? "Lock the doors," he instructed. "Don't open them for anyone but me. The rifle's above the mantel, loaded. You remember what I taught you?" Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good." Will hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more, but the boy was already leading his horse from the barn, saddled and ready. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Then he was mounting up, settling his hat low, transforming before her eyes from the patient teacher into something harder, colder, the lawman, the hunter. He wheeled his horse and took off at a gallop, the boy struggling to keep pace, and within moments they were just dust on the horizon. Emma stood on the porch, watching until she couldn't see them anymore, her heart hammering against her ribs. A murder in Copper Creek. A bank clerk with his throat cut. It probably had nothing to do with her, nothing to do with Victor Maddox or the debt she'd fled. Probably just frontier violence, the kind of casual brutality that happened in towns where law was thin and life was cheap. Probably. But Emma had learned the hard way that coincidence was often just danger wearing a disguise. She went inside and locked the door as Will had instructed, then stood in the center of the quiet house, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Sam Porter. The name meant nothing to her. She'd never been to Copper Creek before yesterday, never met anyone in this town. There was no reason for this killing to have anything to do with her past. No reason at all. Except that men like Victor Maddox had reach. They had connections, networks that spread like spiderwebs across the country. They had ways of finding people who didn't want to be found. Emma moved to the window, peering out at the empty yard, the prairie beyond. She was alone here, truly alone, in a way she'd never been in the city. No neighbors within shouting distance, no crowded streets to disappear into. Just her and the vast wilderness and a rifle she barely knew how to use. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emma tried to occupy herself with housework, sweeping floors that didn't need sweeping, organizing cupboards that were already organized. She made bread because her hands needed something to do, kneading the dough with more force than necessary, trying to work out the anxiety that coiled in her stomach like a snake. By the time the bread was baking, filling the house with its warm, yeasty smell, Emma's nerves were stretched to breaking. She found herself pacing, unable to settle, jumping at every sound. The creak of the house settling, the scratch of windblown sage against the wall, the distant cry of a hawk. She was standing at the window, watching the road for any sign of Will's return, when she saw it. Another rider, approaching from the east. Not Will. This horse was different, lighter in color, and the rider's silhouette was wrong, too lean, too unfamiliar. Emma's hand went to her throat, her pulse suddenly deafening in her ears. The rider was coming straight toward the house, not hurrying, but purposeful, as if he knew exactly where he was going. She backed away from the window, her mind racing. Will had said not to open the door for anyone. But what if this was someone legitimate? A neighbor, another rancher, someone with business at the Carver Ranch? Or what if it wasn't? Emma moved to the mantel, reaching for the rifle Will had said was there. Her hands trembled as she lifted it down, feeling the weight of it, so much heavier than the pistol she'd practiced with that morning. She checked it the way Will had shown her, loaded, ready to fire. The hoofbeats were closer now, entering the yard. Emma moved to the side of the window where she could see out without being clearly visible, the rifle clutched in her hands. The rider was a man, middle-aged, dressed in dusty trail clothes. He had a hard face, weathered and scarred, and when he dismounted, Emma saw the gun belt slung low on his hip, the kind professional gunmen wore. He approached the house slowly, his eyes scanning the windows, the door, taking in details with the practiced assessment of someone who'd done this many times before. He knocked, 3 sharp raps that made Emma flinch. "Mrs. Carver?" His voice was rough, like gravel in a tin cup. "Mrs. Carver, I know you're in there. I can see the smoke from your chimney, smell the bread baking. I'm not here to hurt you. I just need to talk. Emma said nothing, barely breathing, the rifle heavy in her hands. The man waited, then knocked again. Marshal Carver asked me to check on you. There's been some trouble in town. He wanted to make sure you were safe out here. It was a lie. It had to be. Will would have sent the boy back if he'd wanted to check on her, or come himself, or sent his deputy. He wouldn't send a stranger, especially not one who moved like a predator. Mrs. Carver, I can wait out here all day if I need to. Or you can open the door and we can have a civilized conversation. Your choice. Emma's hands tightened on the rifle. Through the window, she could see the man settling himself on the porch steps, making himself comfortable. He pulled out a tobacco pouch and began rolling a cigarette, calm as Sunday morning, as if he had all the time in the world. She was trapped. She couldn't leave. He'd see her the moment she tried for the barn. She couldn't send for help. There was no one close enough to hear, even if she screamed. And she couldn't trust that he'd simply leave if she waited him out. The man lit his cigarette, took a long drag, and exhaled slowly. I know who you are, Emma Lark, he said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. Or should I say, Emma Hartley. That is your real name, isn't it? The one you used back in St. Louis before you decided to reinvent yourself. Emma's blood turned to ice. No, this couldn't be happening. Not here, not now, not when she'd just started to believe she might actually be safe. Victor Maddox sends his regards, the man continued. Says your father owed him a considerable sum. Says that debt doesn't die just because your father did. Says it passes to family the way these things do. Emma's legs went weak. She sank down beside the window, the rifle across her lap, her whole body shaking. This was it. This was the reckoning she'd been running from, catching up to her faster than she'd ever imagined possible. Now Victor's a reasonable man, the stranger went on. He understands you might not have the cash on hand, but he's willing to work something out. All you have to do is come with me. Have a conversation. No one needs to get hurt. No one needs to involve your new husband in this unfortunate business. The threat was clear. Cooperate, or Will would become a target too. Emma closed her eyes, fighting back the tears that wanted to come. She'd done this. She'd brought this danger to Will's doorstep, put a good man in the crosshairs of the kind of evil he couldn't possibly understand. I need an answer, Mrs. Carver, the man said, his voice hardening slightly. And I need it soon. My patience isn't unlimited. Emma opened her eyes, staring at the rifle in her hands. She could shoot him. Will had taught her how. She could open the door and put a bullet in him before he knew what was happening. But then what? Maddox would send others. Men like this didn't work alone. They were the first wave, the warning shot. Killing him would only make things worse, but going with him meant death, or worse than death. It meant everything she'd run from catching up in the most brutal way possible. I'll give you to the count of 10, the man said. Then I'm coming in, and we'll have this conversation on my terms instead of yours. 1, 2. Emma's mind raced, searching for options, for any way out of this trap. She could try to slip out the back, make a run for it across the prairie, but he'd hear her, catch her easily on horseback. She could barricade herself in, hope Will came back before the man broke through. But if Will came back to find this, if he got caught in whatever violence was about to unfold. 3, 4. The rifle, the loaded rifle in her hands, the marksmanship Will had praised just hours ago. It wasn't much, but it was something. Emma stood on trembling legs and moved to the door, positioning herself to the side where she'd have a clear shot when it opened. Her hands were slick with sweat, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. 5, 6. She raised the rifle to her shoulder, sighting down the barrel the way Will had taught her. Breathe, find the calm, squeeze, don't jerk. 7, 8. The sound of hoofbeats made them both freeze. Rapid hoofbeats, multiple horses, approaching fast. Emma risked a glance through the window and felt hope flare painfully bright in her chest. Will. And 2 other men wearing badges, deputies, she guessed, or fellow lawmen from neighboring towns. The stranger on the porch stood quickly, his hand dropping to his gun. But he was outnumbered, and he knew it. Emma watched him calculate the odds, saw the moment he decided discretion was the better part of survival. We'll talk again, Mrs. Carver, he called out, loud enough for her to hear through the door. Real soon. Then he was mounting up, spurring his horse toward the eastern road, riding hard. Will shouted something and one of the other men took off in pursuit, but Emma could already tell it was futile. The stranger had too much of a head start, and his horse was fresh. Will dismounted in a cloud of dust and took the porch steps 2 at a time. Emma, open the door. It's me. Emma's legs wouldn't work. She stood there, frozen, the rifle still raised, her whole body shaking with reaction. Emma, please. I need to know you're all right. The desperation in his voice finally penetrated the fog of shock. Emma lowered the rifle with trembling hands and fumbled with the lock. The moment the door opened, Will was there, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that was almost painful. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? The questions came rapid fire, urgent, and beneath the professional concern, Emma heard something else, genuine fear, raw and undisguised. I'm fine, she managed. He just talked. Through the door. Will's jaw clenched. What did he say? Emma's mind went blank. She couldn't tell him the truth, that the man had called her by her real name, mentioned Maddox, made it clear her past had found her. But she couldn't think of a convincing lie, not with Will's gray eyes boring into hers, reading her the way a lawman learns to read people. He said, she swallowed hard. He said he knew I was alone, that there was trouble in town. He wanted me to open the door. It wasn't quite a lie, but it wasn't the truth either, and Emma saw Will's eyes narrow slightly, catching the evasion. But before he could press her, the remaining deputy called from the yard. Marshal, we found something. Will hesitated, clearly torn between his duty and his concern for Emma. You're sure you're all right? You're not hurt? I'm sure. He studied her a moment longer, then nodded reluctantly. Lock the door behind me. I'll be right outside, but lock it anyway. Emma did as he asked, then watched through the window as Will joined his deputy. The man was holding something, a piece of paper it looked like, and whatever was written on it made Will's whole body go rigid. He snatched the paper, read it, then crushed it in his fist with a violence that made Emma flinch. He said something to the deputy, she couldn't hear what, and the man nodded and headed toward the barn. Then Will was striding back to the house, the paper still clenched in his hand, his expression thunderous. Emma unlocked the door before he could knock. Will came inside, kicked the door shut behind him, and stood there for a moment, visibly trying to control his anger. What is it? Emma asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Will slowly unclenched his fist, smoothing out the crumpled paper. When he held it out to her, Emma felt her heart stop. It was a wanted poster. Old, yellowed with age, the sketch crude but recognizable. And the name at the bottom made her blood run cold. Emma Hartley, wanted for theft and fraud. $500 reward. The silence stretched between them, heavy and damning. Emma couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at the evidence of everything she'd tried to hide. Is it true? Will's voice was quiet, dangerously controlled. Is Emma Lark even your real name? Emma's mouth opened, but no words came out. What could she say? The truth would condemn her. A lie would only make it worse. She was caught, trapped as thoroughly as if the stranger had put her in chains. Emma. Will's voice cracked slightly on her name. I need you to talk to me. I need you to tell me what's going on. Because right now, I've got a dead man in town, a wanted fugitive in my house, and a stranger who knows things he shouldn't, and I can't protect you if I don't know what I'm protecting you from. Protect. The word cut through Emma's panic like a knife. Even knowing what he knew, even holding evidence of her crimes in his hand, Will's first instinct was still to protect her. It broke something in her, the last wall she'd built around the truth. My name is Emma Hartley, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and I'm not who I said I was. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a gunshot, impossible to take back. Emma watched Will's face, saw the muscles in his jaw work as he processed what she'd just admitted. The wanted poster crinkled in his grip, and for a long moment the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the mantel and Emma's ragged breathing. Go on, Will said finally, his voice carefully controlled. Too controlled. the kind of calm that came before a storm. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the house. My father was a gambler, a good one, for a while. But the luck turned, the way it always does, and he started borrowing money from the wrong people. Victor Maddox. Just saying the name made her feel sick. When my father died, Maddox said the debt passed to me. $20,000. Will's eyes widened slightly. 20,000. I didn't have it. I had nothing. No money, no family, no way to pay. Maddox's men made it clear what would happen if I didn't settle up. Emma's hands trembled as she continued. So I ran. Changed my name, saw your advertisement, and thought... Her voice broke. I thought I could disappear. Start over where no one would find me. The charges on this poster, Will said, holding it up. Theft and fraud. Did you steal from Maddox? No. Emma shook her head vehemently. I worked as a seamstress, did alterations for a dress shop. When I left St. Louis, I took fabric that I'd already paid for, materials for orders I'd been working on. But the shop owner, she was connected to Maddox somehow. She filed charges, made it look like I'd robbed her. It was a lie. But who's going to believe a poor seamstress over a respected business owner? Will was quiet, studying the poster with a lawman's eye. Emma watched him, trying to read his expression, but he'd gone distant, closed off in a way that terrified her more than anger would have. The man who was here, Will said slowly. He worked for Maddox? I think so. He knew my real name. He knew about the debt. Emma's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He said Maddox wants to talk. That's what men like Maddox say before they kill you. Will crumpled the poster again, shoving it into Olga's pocket. He paced to the window, staring out at the prairie, his shoulders tight with tension. Emma stood frozen, waiting for judgment, for condemnation, for him to tell her to pack her things and get out. The man in town, Will said, his back still to her. Sam Porter. They cut his throat, but that's not what killed him. He drowned, in about an inch of his own blood, the doc says. Took him several minutes to die. That's a message killing, Emma. The kind men like Maddox used to send warnings. Emma's legs went weak. She sank into a chair, horror washing over her. You think Maddox killed him? But why? Sam Porter, I don't even know who that is. Bank clerk, Will said, turning to face her. His eyes were hard, but underneath Emma saw something else. Calculation. The mind of a marshal working through a puzzle. He processed the telegraphs that came through the bank. If someone sent a message asking about you, inquiring whether a woman matching your description had arrived in Copper Creek, Sam would have been the one to see it. Understanding dawned, cold and sickening. They killed him because he knew I was here, or because he wouldn't tell them where you went. Either way, a man is dead because of you. Will's words were brutal, but his tone wasn't accusatory, just stating facts the way a lawman did. Actually dead, Emma. Not theory, not possibility. His wife found him this morning. His wife, who's now a widow because you brought your trouble to my town. The guilt nearly crushed her. Emma put her face in her hands, fighting back sobs that wanted to tear free. I'm sorry, God. I'm so sorry. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I just wanted to survive. I know. Will's voice softened slightly. I've seen enough desperate people to recognize it when I see it. You're running scared, Emma. Have been since you stepped off that train. I should have seen it sooner. Emma looked up at him through tears. What are you going to do? The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities. He could arrest her, take her in on the wanted poster charges. He could send her back to St. Louis to face Maddox and whatever fate waited there. He could simply tell her to leave, to take her lies and her danger somewhere far away from Copper Creek. Will crossed the room and dropped into the chair across from her. He looked tired suddenly, the weight of too many hard decisions showing in the lines of his face. Tell me everything, and I mean everything this time, Emma. No more lies, no more half-truths. I can't help you if I don't know what we're dealing with. The we're nearly undid her. Even now, knowing what he knew, Will was still thinking in terms of partnership, of facing this together. So Emma told him. She told him about her father's slow descent into gambling addiction, about her mother's death from consumption when Emma was 16, about trying to hold together a life that was falling apart piece by piece. She told him about Maddox, about the first time his men had come to collect, about the threats that started subtle and grew progressively more violent. She told him about the dress shop job, about saving every penny, about the desperate hope that she could somehow pay off the debt before it was too late. "I was going to do it," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I was going to pay him. I had almost $800 saved. It would have taken years to pay off the full debt, but it was a start, proof of good faith. But then my landlady told me 2 men had been asking about me, showing her a picture, offering money for information. I knew what that meant. Maddox was done waiting. So you ran," Will finished. "So I ran. I took what little I had and bought a train ticket west, changed my name, answered your advertisement." Emma met his eyes, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "I'm not a thief, Will. I'm not a criminal. I'm just someone who made the mistake of loving a father who loved gambling more than he loved his daughter." Will was quiet for a long moment, absorbing everything she'd told him. Outside, Emma could hear the deputy moving around, probably seeing to the horses. Normal ranch sounds, ordinary life, while inside this room her entire future balanced on a knife's edge. "This poster," Will said finally, pulling it from his pocket and smoothing it out on the table between them. "It's old, at least 2 years, I'd guess. And the charges are minor, theft of goods valued at less than $200, fraud for using a false name. That's not hanging offenses, Emma. That's maybe a few months in jail, a fine." "Maddox would kill me before I ever saw the inside of a jail cell," Emma said. "You know how men like him work. They own judges, sheriffs, anyone who matters. The law is just a tool they use to get what they want." "Not out here," Will's voice hardened. "Not in my territory. I don't care how much reach Maddox thinks he has. This is my jurisdiction, and I enforce the law here. No one else." Emma wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in the strength she heard in his voice. But she'd seen what Maddox could do, seen how easily power corrupted, how money bought loyalty and silence. "You're one man, Will. One marshal in a territory too big to control. Maddox has resources, connections. He'll send more men, better men than the one who came today. And eventually we'll deal with them too." Will stood, paced to the window again. "That man today? You recognize him?" Emma shook her head. "No, but Maddox employs a lot of men. Enforcers, debt collectors, worse." "He had a scar," Will said. "Right side of his face, running from his eye to his jaw. Walked with a slight limp favoring his left leg. Ring any bells?" "No, I'm sorry." Will nodded, still staring out the window. "My deputy's riding back to town to send some telegraphs. I've got contacts, other marshals, sheriffs, even some Pinkertons I trust. We're going to find out who that man was and who he's working for. And we're going to get word to Maddox that Emma Hartley died somewhere between St. Louis and Colorado. Fever, accident, doesn't matter. We're going to make you disappear properly this time." Hope flared in Emma's chest, bright and painful. "You think that'll work?" "I think it's worth trying. Men like Maddox, they're businessmen at heart. Bad business, sure, but still business. If he thinks you're dead, if there's no profit in chasing you anymore, he'll write off the debt and move on. He's got other people to squeeze, other money to collect." "And if he doesn't believe it?" Will turned from the window, and the look in his eyes made Emma's breath catch. It was pure steel, the expression of a man who'd faced down death more times than he could count and come out standing. "Then we make him believe it, whatever it takes." The promise in those words should have frightened her. Instead, Emma felt something loosen in her chest, the constant tension that had been her companion since fleeing St. Louis, the fear that had driven every decision, every lie. For the first time in months, she wasn't alone in this fight. "Why are you helping me?" The question came out raw, confused. "I lied to you. About everything. My name, my past, my reasons for coming here. I brought death to your town. Why don't you just arrest me and be done with it?" Will was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than Emma had ever heard it. "Because I understand running, Emma. I understand being so desperate for a new start that you'll do things you never thought yourself capable of. I understand lying to survive." He paused, something painful crossing his face. "During the war, I did things I'm not proud of. things that keep me up at night. And when it was over, when I came back here, I had a choice. Let those things define me, or try to build something better, something worth the lives it cost to survive. Emma stood slowly, moved closer to him. What did you do? Doesn't matter now. What matters is I made a choice to be better than my worst moments, and I'm offering you the same chance. Will met her eyes, and Emma saw the raw honesty there, the weight of old sins and hard-won redemption. But it starts with truth, Emma. No more lies between us. Can you do that? Could she? Emma had been lying for so long, to Maddox's men, to herself, to Will, that truth felt foreign, dangerous. But looking at this man who'd shown her more grace than she deserved, who'd offered protection when he could have offered judgment, she found herself nodding. I can try, she said. That's all I can promise, but I'll try. That's enough. Will held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Emma took it. His grip was firm, warm, and Emma felt the calluses that spoke of honest work, honest living. Partners, then, for real this time. Partners, Emma agreed and meant it. They stood like that for a moment, hands clasped, an understanding passing between them that went deeper than words. Then Will released her hand and moved toward the door. I need to get back to town, see what else my deputies found. You'll be safe here. I'm leaving Jenkins on watch. He's young, but he's good, and he'll raise hell if anyone comes within a mile of this place. What about you? Emma asked. If Maddox's men are in Copper Creek, then they'll find out what happens when they bring their trouble to my territory. Will settled his hat on his head, checked his gun with the automatic gesture of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but Jenkins or me. And Emma? He paused in the doorway. Keep that rifle close, just in case. Emma nodded, fear and gratitude warring in her chest. She watched him cross the yard to where a young deputy stood waiting. Jenkins, she assumed. They spoke briefly, Will's gestures sharp and commanding, and then Will was mounting up, riding back toward town at a pace that spoke of urgency. Jenkins approached the house, and Emma saw what Will had meant about young. The deputy couldn't have been more than 22, with a smooth face and earnest eyes. But he carried himself with the careful alertness of someone who'd learned not to take safety for granted. Mrs. Carver, he said, touching his hat. Marshall says I'm to keep watch. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Thank you, Emma said, though the title, Mrs. Carver, felt like just another lie. They weren't married yet, might never be now that Will knew the truth. She closed and locked the door, then moved through the house, checking windows, making sure everything was secure. The rifle went back above the mantel, but Emma kept the pistol Will had given her that morning close at hand. Her mother's gun, Will had said. The thought made her chest tight, that he'd trusted her with something so personal even before he'd known who she really was. The afternoon stretched long and anxious. Emma tried to occupy herself with ordinary tasks, finishing the bread, preparing vegetables for dinner, sweeping floors that didn't need sweeping. But her mind kept circling back to Sam Porter, to the man with the scarred face, to Maddox and the long reach of his vengeance. She was peeling potatoes when she heard horses again, multiple riders this time, approaching at a steady pace. Emma's heart jumped, and she grabbed the pistol, moving to the window. But it was Will returning, along with 2 other men she didn't recognize. They all wore badges, and Emma relaxed slightly. Lawmen, Will's reinforcements. She unlocked the door as Will dismounted, and he waved her back inside with a gesture that brooked no argument. The men gathered in the yard, their voices too low for Emma to make out, but she could see the tension in their postures, the way they kept scanning the horizon. Finally, Will broke away and came inside, closing the door firmly behind him. His face was grim, and Emma knew before he spoke that the news wasn't good. They found the man with the scar, Will said without preamble. Or what's left of him. Someone put 3 bullets in him about 5 miles east of here, left him for the buzzards. Emma felt the room tilt. Maddox? That'd be my guess. Dead men can't talk, can't tell us who hired them or what they know. It's a clean ending, for Maddox anyway. Will removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair in frustration. We're dealing with someone smart, Emma. Someone who plans ahead, covers tracks. That makes this harder. What do we do? Will met her eyes, and Emma saw the determination there, the stubborn refusal to back down. We stick to the plan. I've sent telegraphs to contacts in St. Louis, asking them to put out word that Emma Hartley died of fever in Kansas. Got a doctor there who owes me a favor. He'll produce a death certificate if needed. Meanwhile, you're Emma Carver now, my wife, fresh from back east. New name, new life, new identity that's actually legal this time. Emma's breath caught. We're not married, Will. We will be. Tomorrow, if you're willing. Circuit preachers do in Copper Creek comes through once a month. We'll make it official, make you legally Emma Carver. That gives you protection, Emma. As my wife, you've got legal standing, rights, and it makes the story more believable. It was practical, sensible, the smart move strategically. But Emma heard what Will wasn't saying, that this would be a marriage of convenience, protection rather than partnership, legal contract rather than love. And after? She asked quietly. After Maddox believes I'm dead? After the danger passes? What then? Will was quiet for a long moment. Then we figure it out. Maybe we make it work for real. Maybe we go our separate ways, but either way, you'll be free. That's what matters. Emma wanted to argue, to say that freedom bought with such sacrifice wasn't really freedom at all. But she was tired, so tired of running, of lying, of looking over her shoulder. If Will was offering her a way out, who was she to refuse? All right, she said. Tomorrow. We'll make it official. Something flickered in Will's eyes. Relief, maybe, or resignation. I'll sleep in the barn tonight. Won't be proper otherwise, what with the preacher coming. Jenkins and the others will keep watch in shifts. You should get some rest. He moved toward the door, but Emma's voice stopped him. Will? Thank you. For believing me. For helping me. I don't deserve it, but thank you. Will turned, and for just a moment his expression softened. Maybe you don't think you deserve it. But Emma, everyone deserves a chance to start over, to be better than their worst day. I'm just giving you what I wish someone had given me. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Emma stood alone in the quiet house, processing everything that had happened. Tomorrow, she would become Emma Carver. Tomorrow she would bind herself legally to a man she barely knew, a man she'd lied to from the beginning. Tomorrow she would try to build a life on the ashes of the one she'd fled. But tonight she was still Emma Hartley, or whatever fractured version of herself she'd become in the months of running and hiding. Tonight she could grieve for the woman she might have been. If the world had been kinder, if her father had been different, if Maddox had never darkened her door. Emma climbed the stairs to her room, exhaustion settling into her bones. She changed into her nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the small mirror on the washstand. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her face looked thin, drawn. She barely recognized herself anymore. A sound from outside made her tense, footsteps on the porch, measured and careful. Emma reached for the pistol on the bedside table, her heart hammering. Mrs. Carver! Jenkins' voice, young and apologetic. Sorry to disturb you, ma'am. Just doing rounds, making sure everything's secure. You all right in there? Emma exhaled slowly. I'm fine, Deputy. Thank you for checking. Yes, ma'am. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Try to get some rest. Rest. As if sleep were possible with everything churning in her mind. Emma lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the knots in the wood planks overhead. Somewhere out there, Maddox was hunting her. Somewhere out there, men were dying because she'd been desperate enough to run. And tomorrow she would marry a man who deserved better than a wife built on lies and desperation. But maybe, and this was the thought that kept circling back, persistent as a prayer, maybe Will was right. Maybe everyone deserved a chance to be better than their worst moments. Maybe redemption was possible, even for someone like her. Emma closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she let herself imagine a future that didn't involve running. She imagined learning to really shoot, to ride, to work this land beside a man who'd shown her more grace than she'd ever known. She imagined becoming Emma Carver in truth, not just in name. She imagined being worthy of the protection Will offered, of the trust he placed in her despite everything. It was a fragile dream, as insubstantial as morning mist, but it was something, and right now something was more than she'd had in a very long time. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of shadows. Emma dreamed of running through endless prairie, of hands reaching for her that she could never quite escape, of a voice calling her name. Emma, Emma. But she could never tell if it was Maddox or Will or some ghost of her former self. She woke to gray dawn light and the sound of roosters crowing. For a disoriented moment, Emma couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The ranch, Will, the wedding that would happen today if she had the courage to go through with it. Emma rose and dressed carefully in her best dress, dark blue calico with white trim, respectable, if not fancy. She pinned her hair up with more care than usual, as if proper grooming could somehow make her more worthy of what was about to happen. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, and she had to start over twice when pins slipped free. Downstairs, she found Will already up, standing at the stove making coffee. He'd changed into clean clothes, still working attire, but the shirt was pressed and his hair was neatly combed. He looked up when she entered, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of what this day meant. "Morning," he said quietly. "Coffee's almost ready." "Thank you." Emma moved to help, needing something to do with her hands. "What time is the preacher coming?" "Noon. Gives us time to get into town, handle some business first." Will poured 2 cups of coffee, handed one to her. "I need you to sign some papers, transferring property rights, establishing you as my legal next of kin. Protection, in case anything happens to me." The casual way he mentioned his potential death made Emma's stomach clench. "Will, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." His voice was firm. "This is my choice, Emma. I'm going into this with my eyes open. I need to know that if something happens, you'll be taken care of. The ranch, the savings I've put aside, it should go to you. You're going to be my wife, legally and officially. That means something." Emma's throat tightened. "Even though it's not real? Even though we're only doing this for protection?" Will set down his coffee cup, turned to face her fully. "Who says it's not real? Maybe it didn't start the way most marriages do. Maybe we're doing this for practical reasons. But Emma, marriage is what you make it. And I figure we've got as good a chance as any of making something real out of this arrangement, if we want to." The "if we want to" hung in the air between them, a question neither of them was quite ready to answer. Emma looked at this man, this steady, solid man who'd offered her salvation when she deserved condemnation, and felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it, the fragile hope that maybe, somehow, they could build something genuine from this foundation of necessity and lies. "I want to try," she said softly, "if you're willing to try with me." Will's expression softened, and he reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture so gentle it made Emma's eyes sting. "Then we'll try. Together." They finished their coffee in companionable silence, the awkwardness of the previous days easing into something that felt almost comfortable. Will made breakfast, simple fare of eggs and bacon, bread from yesterday's baking, and they ate together as the sun climbed higher, painting the prairie in shades of gold. Jenkins came in as they were finishing, looking tired but alert. "Morning, Marshall, Mrs. Carver, all quiet through the night, no signs of trouble." "Good." Will stood, collecting the dishes. "Get some rest, Jenkins. I'll have Davis take over watch while we're in town." "Yes, sir?" The young deputy hesitated. "Marshall, about today, congratulations. I hope you'll both be very happy." The sincerity in his voice made Emma want to cry. These people, Will, Jenkins, the deputies she'd barely met, they were all willing to protect her, to risk themselves for a woman they didn't know, based solely on Will's word that she was worth saving. The weight of that trust was almost unbearable. "Thank you, Deputy," she managed. After Jenkins left, Will and Emma prepared for the trip to town. Will hitched up the wagon while Emma gathered what few possessions she'd brought with her, the deed to her non-existent property back east that she'd forged, the letters Will had written that seemed like artifacts from another lifetime, the small stash of money she'd managed to save. She was tucking the letters carefully into her bag when Will appeared in the doorway. His eyes went to the papers in her hand, and Emma saw recognition dawn. "You kept them," he said. "The letters I wrote." Emma felt her face heat. "I meant to burn them. They were evidence of the deception, but I couldn't. They were the only honest thing in my life, even if my responses were lies." Will moved into the room, took the letters gently from her hands. He flipped through them, his expression unreadable. You know what's strange? I kept yours too. Tied them with string, put them in the drawer by my bed. Read them over when the loneliness got too heavy. Even though I lied? The feelings were real, even if the facts weren't. I could tell you were lonely, scared, looking for something better. That part was true, wasn't it? You just left out the details of why. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. Will handed the letters back to her. Keep them. Maybe someday we'll read them together and laugh about how two desperate people found each other through newspaper advertisements and careful fabrication. Or maybe we'll burn them together, start fresh with nothing but truth between us. Either way, they're part of our story now. Our story. The words settled over Emma like a blessing she hadn't earned but desperately wanted to deserve. They rode to Copper Creek in the wagon, the morning bright and clear, the prairie stretching endlessly in all directions. Will drove with practiced ease, and Emma found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, alert for danger even in peaceful moments. This was a man shaped by war and loss, by hard choices and harder consequences. And somehow, impossibly, he'd chosen to stand beside her. Copper Creek was busier than when Emma had first arrived. The main street bustled with Saturday activity, ranchers in for supplies, women shopping, children chasing each other between buildings. People called out greetings to Will as they passed, and Emma saw the respect in their faces, the trust they placed in their marshal. Will pulled the wagon up in front of a small office with Land Registry and Legal Services painted on the window. Inside, a clerk waited with papers already prepared. Emma signed where Will indicated, transferring her fictional property holdings, establishing herself in the legal record as Emma Lark, soon to be Emma Carver. Each signature felt like a nail in the coffin of her old life, sealing away Emma Hartley forever. That's done then, the clerk said, blotting the final signature. Congratulations on your upcoming nuptials, Marshal. Mrs. Carver, you're a lucky woman. Yes, Emma said, and found she meant it. I am. They stepped back into the sunlight, and Will checked his pocket watch. Hour until the preacher arrives. There's something I want to show you first. He led her down the street to the general store, but instead of going inside, he guided her around back to where a small cottage sat, neat and well-maintained with a garden plot beside it. This is Sarah Porter's place, Will said quietly. Sam's widow. I need to check on her, make sure she's managing. It won't take long. Emma's guilt surged fresh and sharp. Will, I can't. She's a widow because of me. She's a widow because someone murdered her husband. That's not on you, Emma. Will's voice was firm. But I understand if you'd rather wait out here. You, Emma. Will's voice was firm. But I understand if you'd rather wait out here. Emma steeled herself. No, I'll come. I need to face what my running caused. Will knocked, and a moment later the door opened to reveal a woman in her 30s, red-eyed and exhausted. Her face brightened slightly when she saw Will. Marshal Carver, thank you for coming. Her eyes moved to Emma, curious and wary. Sarah, this is Emma Lark. My fiancée. We're getting married today. Will's voice was gentle. Emma, this is Mrs. Sarah Porter. Emma extended her hand, forcing herself to meet Sarah's eyes despite the shame burning in her chest. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Porter. I can't imagine what you're going through. Sarah took her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Thank you. Sam was a good man. Didn't deserve what happened to him. Her voice broke slightly, and she withdrew her hand to wipe her eyes. Sorry, I keep thinking I've cried myself empty, but then it starts again. No apologies needed, Will said. How are you managing? Is there anything you need? The church ladies have been wonderful. Too wonderful, really. I can't eat all the food they've brought, but, Marshal, I remembered something about the day Sam died. Sarah's voice dropped. He came home for lunch that day, which wasn't usual. He was agitated, kept looking out the window like he expected someone. I asked what was wrong, but he said it was bank business, nothing for me to worry about. Will leaned forward slightly. Did he say what kind of business? No, but he had a paper with him, a telegram, I think. He burned it in the stove before he left, but I saw part of it first. It had a name on it, Emma something. Emma Hartley, maybe. I can't be sure. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Will's hand found hers, squeezed gently in warning or comfort. She couldn't tell which. "That's helpful, Sarah," Will said, his voice steady. "If you remember anything else, anything at all, you let me know. Day or night, you send word." Sarah nodded, then seemed to really see Emma for the first time. "Emma, you said? That's a coincidence, the name being the same." "Common enough name," Will interjected smoothly. "Emma, we should go. Don't want to be late for our own wedding." He tipped his hat to Sarah. "You take care, Mrs. Porter. And remember, anything you need, you send word." They walked back toward the main street, Emma's heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "She knows," Emma whispered. "She knows my name was in that telegram. She suspects something, maybe. But she doesn't know what. And she won't find out, not from me." Will guided her toward the church, a white clapboard building with a modest steeple. "Emma, you need to breathe. You're pale as a ghost." "A man died because of me, Will. His widow just told us he burned a telegram with my name on it. How am I supposed to live with that?" Will stopped, turned her to face him. "By being better going forward. By making his death mean something. By building a life that honors the sacrifice, even if he didn't know he was making it." His hands gripped her shoulders, steady and sure. "Sam Porter made a choice, Emma. Maybe he refused to give up information about you. Maybe he tried to protect you, a stranger he'd never met. That was his choice, his honor. Don't diminish it by drowning in guilt." Emma wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that absolution. But the weight of it sat heavy on her shoulders, a burden she suspected she'd carry the rest of her life. The church was empty except for the preacher, a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. 2 witnesses waited as well. Townspeople Will knew and trusted. Everything had been arranged, neat and efficient, a wedding stripped of romance and reduced to pure function. "Marshal Carver," the preacher greeted them warmly, "and this must be your bride. My dear, you're lovely. Shall we begin?" Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. Will offered his arm, and she took it, letting him lead her to stand before the preacher. The ceremony was brief, stripped of flourishes. The words washed over Emma: honor, cherish, until death do you part, each one feeling impossibly weighty. When the preacher asked if she took Will Carver to be her lawfully wedded husband, Emma's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I do." Will's response was stronger, steadier. "I do. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Will leaned in, and Emma's breath caught. But the kiss was chaste, respectful, a brief press of lips that sealed their vows without presuming more intimacy than they'd earned. When he pulled back, Emma saw something in his eyes that made her chest tight. Not love, not yet, but promise. The possibility of it. They signed the license, the witnesses added their names, and just like that, Emma Hartley ceased to exist in the eyes of the law. Emma Carver took her place, a woman with a clean slate, a fresh start, and a husband who knew the worst of her and chose to stand beside her anyway. Outside the church, a small crowd had gathered, townspeople who'd heard about the marshal's wedding and come to witness it. They called out congratulations, and Emma forced herself to smile, to accept their well wishes with grace she didn't feel. "Speech Marshal," someone called out. "Tell us how you won such a pretty bride." Will held up his hand, quieting the crowd. "No speech needed. I'm a lucky man, that's all there is to it. Now, if you'll excuse us, I'd like to take my wife home." My wife. The words sent a shiver through Emma, fear and hope tangled together so tightly she couldn't separate them. They climbed into the wagon, and Will drove them out of town, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders. Emma waited until Copper Creek was behind them before she spoke. "What happens now?" Will didn't look at her, his attention on the road ahead. "Now we go home. We live our lives. We wait to see if Maddox believes you're dead, and we try to make something real out of this marriage, if that's what we both want. And if Maddox doesn't believe it, if he keeps coming, then we deal with it, together." Will finally turned to look at her, and Emma saw the determination in his face, the stubborn refusal to surrender. "You're my wife now, Emma. That means something to me. It means I protect what's mine, no matter what comes. You understand?" Emma nodded, her throat too tight for words. This man, this good, stubborn, impossibly brave man, had just bound himself to her, knowing full well the danger it brought. And he'd done it anyway, without hesitation, without complaint. "Will," she said softly, "I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you've given me today. I promise you that." "Just be honest with me," Will replied. "That's all I ask. No more lies, no more secrets. We face whatever comes together, with truth between us. Can you do that?" Emma thought about the lies she'd told, the secrets she still carried, the fear that lived in her bones, the guilt that would haunt her dreams. But she also thought about the man beside her, about the chance he'd given her, about the life they might build if she had the courage to try. "Yes," she said, "I can do that. I will do that." Will's hand found hers, rough and warm and steady. "Then we'll be all right. Whatever comes, we'll face it." They rode in silence for a while, hands clasped, two people who'd found each other through desperation and deception, but might yet find something genuine in the aftermath. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, vast and beautiful and unforgiving. But for the first time since fleeing St. Louis, Emma didn't feel alone in facing it. She had a husband now, a home, a name that was hers by law and vow. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd dreamed of as a girl, wasn't the romance her mother had whispered about before consumption stole her voice, but it was real, solid, something she could build on. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The ranch felt different when they returned that afternoon, not in any physical way, but in the weight of what it now represented. This wasn't just Will's homestead anymore. It was their home, bound by legal vows and witnessed promises. Emma climbed down from the wagon, her new husband's hand steadying her, and looked at the weathered house with fresh eyes. She was Emma Carver now. This life was hers to claim, if she had the courage. Will unhitched the horses without a word, the comfortable silence between them speaking of exhaustion more than contentment. The day had been long, emotionally draining, and Emma could see the tension still coiled in his shoulders, despite the wedding being done. He was a man on alert, always watching, and she realized with a pang that her presence had doubled his burden rather than easing it. "I'll start dinner," Emma said, needing something practical to anchor herself. "Don't fuss on my account. Cold biscuits would do fine." Will led the horses toward the barn, then paused. "Emma, about tonight, the sleeping arrangements. I meant what I said before. I'll take the chair downstairs until we figure things out properly." Heat crept up Emma's neck. In all the chaos and fear, she'd barely thought about the intimate reality of marriage. They were husband and wife in the eyes of God and the law, but strangers still in every way that mattered. "That doesn't seem fair. You've given up so much already." "Fair's got nothing to do with it. I won't rush you into something neither of us is ready for." His gray eyes held hers steady and sincere. "We've got time, Emma. Let's use it to build something real before we worry about the rest." Emma nodded, grateful for his patience, even as part of her wondered if time was a luxury they could afford. Somewhere out there, Maddox was hunting ghosts, and ghosts had a way of becoming real again when you least expected it. She went inside and set about making a proper meal despite Will's protests. Roasted chicken from the coop, potatoes, early squash from the struggling garden she'd noticed behind the house. Cooking steadied her, gave her hands purpose, and her mind a reprieve from the constant anxiety. By the time Will came in, smelling of horse and hay, the kitchen was warm with the scent of home. They ate at the small table, the lamplight casting gentle shadows across Will's face. Emma found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking, the way his shoulders curved slightly forward from years of hard labor, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the careful way he chewed his food as if savoring something he'd learned not to take for granted. "This is good," he said quietly. "Best meal I've had in this house since my mother passed. Thank you." "You don't have to thank me for cooking. I meant what I said about partnership." Will set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. "Partnership's a two-way road, Emma. I've been thinking about that. About what you bring to this arrangement besides just needing protection. You're educated, well-spoken, capable. Those aren't small things out here." "I can't rope cattle or fix a roof," Emma pointed out. "But you can read and write better than most. You can keep accounts, handle correspondence, manage the household finances. Those skills matter, maybe more than you realize. Will leaned back in his chair. Truth is, the ranch work is only part of what I do. The marshal duties. They come with paperwork, reports, legal documents I struggle through because reading was never my strong suit. I can do it, but it takes me twice as long as it should. Understanding dawned. You want me to help with your marshal work? If you're willing. It would free up time for me to handle the physical labor, and it would give you something useful to do besides worrying. He paused. Also, it keeps you close. Safer if you're working alongside me rather than isolated out here when I have to ride into town. Emma considered this. The idea of being involved in the very work that had initially terrified her felt wrong somehow, like dancing with the devil. But Will was right. Useful work would give her purpose, keep her mind occupied. And staying close to him meant protection, meant not being alone when danger came calling. All right, she agreed. I'll help however I can. Relief softened Will's features. Good. We'll start tomorrow. I've got a stack of incident reports that need filing, and I'm 3 weeks behind on my monthly summaries for the territorial marshal. Fair warning, my handwriting's terrible, so you'll be doing a lot of translating. They finished dinner in companionable quiet, and Emma felt something settle between them. Not quite ease, but the beginning of it. The foundation of a working relationship that might, with time and luck, grow into something more. She was washing dishes when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong, sharp and sudden against the evening stillness. Breaking glass. Will was on his feet instantly, gun drawn, his body between Emma and the window where a rock had shattered one of the small panes. Wrapped around the rock was a piece of paper, and even from across the room Emma could see writing scrawled across it. "Stay down," Will commanded, moving toward the broken window with the careful precision of a man who'd walked into ambushes before. Emma's heart hammered as she crouched behind the table, watching Will scan the darkening yard through the broken window. The silence stretched, taut as wire, and then Will was reaching through the shattered pane to grab the rock and its message. He unfolded the paper, and Emma saw his jaw clench, saw the fury that flashed across his face before he schooled it into something harder, colder. "What does it say?" Emma whispered. Will crumpled the paper in his fist. "Nothing that matters. Will, please." He crossed to her, pressed the paper into her hand. Emma smoothed it out, her hands trembling, and read the words scrawled in rough block letters. "The Hartley girl lives. 20,000 says she's worth more alive than dead. Tick-tock. Marshall?" The room spun. Emma gripped the edge of the table, fighting for breath. They knew. Maddox knew, or suspected, and now he was playing games, letting them know he was close. "How?" Emma managed. "We were careful. The telegrams, the death certificate. Someone talked. Or someone got suspicious. Doesn't matter how right now." Will was at the door checking the locks, scanning the windows. What matters is they're watching, waiting. Probably have been since that man showed up yesterday. "The wedding," Emma said, horror dawning. "All those people saw us. If one of them works for Maddox, then we've already been made, and this note is just confirmation." Will returned to her side, his hands gentle on her shoulders despite the violence coiled in his frame. "Emma, look at me. Look at me." She forced her eyes to meet his, saw the determination there, the absolute refusal to surrender. "I told you I'd protect you, and I meant it. This changes nothing except our timeline. We're going to have to move faster, be smarter." Will's thumb brushed her cheek, and Emma realized tears were streaming down her face. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Emma wanted to. God, she wanted to trust that this man could stand against the kind of evil Maddox represented, that his badge and his gun and his stubborn courage would be enough. But she'd seen what Maddox's money could buy, violence wrapped in legitimacy, murder dressed up as justice. "He'll kill you," she whispered. He'll kill you to get to me, and I can't let that happen." "Then don't let it happen by running. Let it not happen by standing with me and fighting." Will pulled her close, and Emma let herself lean into his strength, let herself pretend for just a moment that she was safe. "I've faced down worse than hired guns and corrupt businessmen, Confederate cavalry, hostile Indians, outlaws who'd as soon shoot you as look at you. I'm still here, Emma, still standing." "Those men weren't hunting someone you cared about." The words slipped out before Emma could stop them, and she felt Will go still against her. She'd revealed too much, shown her hand in a way she hadn't intended. But when Will pulled back to look at her, his expression wasn't uncomfortable or pitying. It was something warmer, something that made Emma's breath catch. "No," he said quietly. "They weren't, which means I've got more reason to win this time than I've had in a long while. That makes me dangerous, Emma. Never underestimate a man fighting for something that matters." Before Emma could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Not the aggressive pounding of an enemy, but a distinct pattern. 3 quick raps, pause, 2 more. Will visibly relaxed. "That's Jenkins," he said, releasing Emma and moving to unlock the door. The young deputy stood on the porch, his face grim in the lamplight spilling from inside. "Marshal, we've got a problem. Davis found tracks. 3 riders, maybe 4, circling the property. They stayed out of rifle range, but they wanted us to know they were there." "How long ago?" Will asked, already strapping on his gun belt. "Hour, maybe less. We followed the trail about a mile east before losing it in the creek bed." Jenkins's eyes found Emma, and she saw sympathy there and worry. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. We should have spotted them sooner." "It's not your fault," Emma said, though her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Will was checking his rifle, loading extra ammunition into his pockets with practiced efficiency. "Jenkins, I want you and Davis to stay here tonight, inside the house, taking shifts. Emma doesn't go anywhere without one of you watching. Understood?" "Yes, sir. What about you?" "I'm going to visit some people, ask some questions. Someone in Copper Creek is feeding information to Maddox's men, and I intend to find out who." Will grabbed his hat, his jaw set in a way that promised trouble for whoever was fool enough to cross him. Emma caught his arm. "Will, it's dark. If they're out there waiting, then they'll learn what happens when you threaten what's mine." He covered her hand with his, squeezed once. "I'll be back before dawn. Lock this door behind me, and don't open it for anyone but Jenkins or me. You remember the signal?" Emma nodded, her throat too tight for words. Will paused at the door, looked back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Emma, whatever happens tonight, whatever I have to do, I need you to understand it's all in service of keeping you safe. I won't apologize for that." Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness beyond the porch, and Emma was left standing in the lamplight with a young deputy who looked barely old enough to shave, let alone stand against the kind of evil closing in around them. Jenkins cleared his throat. "Ma'am, why don't you try to get some rest? I'll keep watch down here." Rest. The suggestion was almost laughable, but Emma nodded, too weary to argue. She climbed the stairs to her room, each step feeling like an insurmountable effort. The broken window downstairs let in the night air, carrying with it the smell of sage and the distant howl of coyotes. Emma changed into her nightgown mechanically, her mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. Will confronting Maddox's informant, Will riding into an ambush, Will bleeding out in some dark alley while she hid in this house like a coward. She was reaching to extinguish the lamp when she noticed something on the washstand, something that hadn't been there that morning. A small wooden box, simple and unadorned, with a note propped against it in Will's careful handwriting. "For my wife. Thought you should have something of your mother's, the way you gave me something of mine to protect. W." Emma opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. She opened it and found 2 tiny portraits, a stern-faced man with Will's eyes and a gentle woman with a soft smile. His parents. The gift overwhelmed her. This was a family heirloom, something precious and irreplaceable, and Will had given it to her despite knowing the truth of who she was and what she'd done. Emma fastened the chain around her neck, feeling the weight of the locket settle against her heart like a promise. She extinguished the lamp and lay in the darkness, one hand wrapped around the locket, listening to Jenkins moving around downstairs. The house creaked and settled around her, familiar sounds made sinister by fear and imagination. Every noise became a threat, the wind rattling the windows, the scratch of branches against the siding, the distant thunder of hoofbeats that might be real or might be terror manifesting in sound. Hours crawled by. Emma dozed fitfully, her sleep plagued by nightmares. Maddox's face looming out of darkness, Will lying dead in the street, the stranger with the scarred face laughing as he reached for her. She woke gasping more than once, her nightgown soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. It was during one of these wakeful periods that she heard it, voices downstairs, low and urgent. Emma crept to the top of the stairs, straining to hear. "Can't be sure it was him," Jenkins was saying. "Could have been anyone." "It was him." Will's voice rough with exhaustion and anger. "I found where he's been staying, boarding house on the edge of town. Left in a hurry, probably an hour before I got there. But he left evidence behind, stupid or arrogant, I'm not sure which." "What kind of evidence?" There was a pause, then the sound of paper rustling. "Telegraph receipts. 5 of them. All sent to St. Louis over the past week. All addressed to Victor Maddox." Emma's blood ran cold. 5 telegrams. Someone had been reporting her every move to Maddox since before she'd even arrived in Copper Creek. "Who was sending them?" Jenkins asked. Will's answer was grim. "Thomas Brennan, the telegraph operator." Emma remembered the name vaguely. She'd seen it on a window in town, part of the services offered at the general store. The telegraph operator. Of course, he would have seen every message coming in or going out, would have been perfectly positioned to intercept information about Emma's arrival and report it back to Maddox. "What do you want to do, Marshal?" Jenkins asked. "Find him. Bring him in for questioning. And Jenkins, when we do find him, I want to know everything. Who hired him? How much they paid? What else he knows about Maddox's operation out here?" Will's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Because I guarantee Brennan's not working alone. Maddox doesn't operate that way. He's got multiple people on his payroll, insurance, in case one gets caught." Emma couldn't listen anymore. She retreated to her room, her mind racing. Multiple informants. Maddox had woven his web through Copper Creek before she'd ever arrived, preparing for the possibility that she'd run this direction. How long had he known? How much had he planned? She was still sitting on the edge of her bed, hands clenched in her lap when she heard footsteps on the stairs. A gentle knock, then Will's voice, barely above a whisper. "Emma, can I come in?" She should have said no, should have maintained propriety even in crisis, but fear and exhaustion had stripped away pretense. "Yes." The door opened, and Will stepped inside, closing it softly behind him. In the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains, Emma could see the weariness etched into his face, the weight of the night's revelations aging him. "I heard," Emma said before he could speak. "The telegraph operator. Multiple informants, all of it." Will crossed to sit beside her on the bed, keeping a respectful distance, but close enough that Emma could feel his warmth. "I'm sorry you had to hear it that way. I was going to tell you in the morning after you'd had some rest." "Rest?" Emma laughed, a hollow sound. "Will, he's been watching me since before I even got here. Maybe longer. What if he knew I'd answered your advertisement? What if he let me run, let me think I was escaping, just so he could make an example out of what happens when you cross him?" "Then he's made a critical mistake," Will said, his voice hard. "Because he assumed I'd be intimidated by his reach, by his resources. He assumed I'd hand you over to save myself and my town. But Emma, I've stared down worse than Victor Maddox, and I've never yet surrendered something I was sworn to protect." Emma turned to look at him, this man who kept offering her salvation she didn't deserve. "Why? Why are you doing this? It's not just duty. It's not just honor. What is it, Will? What makes me worth all this trouble?" Will was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was raw with honesty she could feel in her bones. "Because when you stepped off that train, scared and lying and desperate, I saw myself. Not as I am now, but as I was after the war, running from what I'd done, from who I'd become, trying to build something clean on a foundation of blood and shame." He turned to face her fully. "I told you I did things during the war I'm not proud of, things that still wake me up at night. And when I came back here I had a choice. Let those things define me or try to be better. I chose better, Emma. And I'm offering you the same choice because someone should have offered it to me and didn't." Tears streamed down Emma's face, unchecked. "What if I can't be better? What if this is all I am? A liar and a coward who brings death wherever she goes?" "Then you'd be like most of humanity, trying to survive in a world that's harder than we deserve. Will's hand found hers in the darkness, calloused and warm and steady. But I don't believe that's all you are. I've seen you face down fear, make the hard choice to trust when trust could destroy you. I've seen you try, Emma, and trying is the first step to being better. Emma broke then, the careful walls she'd built around her emotions crumbling like sand. She turned into Will's chest, sobbing, and felt his arms come around her, hesitant at first, then stronger, holding her together when she was falling apart. "I'm so tired," she whispered against his shirt. "I'm so tired of being afraid, of running, of looking over my shoulder every moment. I just want it to stop." I know. Will's hand stroked her hair, the gesture surprisingly gentle for such a hard man. "And it will stop, I promise you. One way or another, this ends soon." They sat like that for a long time, Emma crying out months of fear and grief while Will held her, solid and unshakable. Eventually, the tears slowed, then stopped, leaving Emma hollow but somehow lighter, as if the release had purged some of the poison from her soul. "I'm sorry," she said, pulling back and wiping her eyes. "I didn't mean to Don't apologize for being human." Will's thumb brushed away a tear she'd missed. "We all break sometimes. The trick is letting someone help put you back together." Emma looked at him, really looked, and saw not just the marshal or the rancher or the man she'd deceived, but someone who understood brokenness intimately, who'd survived it and come out stronger. And in that moment, something shifted between them, some barrier falling away to reveal the possibility of genuine connection beneath. "Will," she said softly, "that kiss at the church. It was practical," he finished. "Expected. Nothing either of us needed to feel pressured about." "What if I want to feel pressured?" The words came out before Emma could stop them, bold and terrifying in their honesty. Will went very still. "Emma, you're exhausted and scared and you've had an impossible day. This isn't the time to what? To acknowledge that somewhere between desperate necessity and forced vows, I've started to care about you?" Emma's heart hammered, but she forced herself to continue. "I'm not asking for declarations or promises, Will. I'm just saying that when I thought about you riding into danger tonight, the fear I felt wasn't about losing protection. It was about losing you." Will's breath caught audibly. His hand came up to cup her face, his touch achingly gentle. "Emma, if we do this, if we take this step, there's no going back. You understand that? I'm not a man who takes intimacy lightly, especially not with someone I've sworn to protect." "I understand." Emma covered his hand with hers. "I'm not asking for everything, Will. Just don't go back downstairs tonight. Stay with me. Let me know I'm not alone." For a moment, Will looked torn, duty and desire warring visibly across his features. Then something resolved in his expression, a decision made. "All right, I'll stay. But Emma, we do this right. No regrets in the morning, no using closeness to hide from fear." "No regrets," Emma agreed. Will stood and crossed to the door, and for a moment Emma thought he'd changed his mind, was going to leave after all. But he was just removing his gun belt, hanging it carefully on the hook by the door where he could reach it if needed. Then he returned to the bed, settling himself on top of the covers fully clothed. "Come here," he said, opening his arms. Emma lay down beside him, resting her head on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. Will's arms came around her, secure and warm, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Emma felt truly safe. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that their presence couldn't communicate better. Will's breathing gradually slowed, deepened, and Emma realized he was falling asleep. This man who'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, who'd ridden into danger to protect her, who'd offered her everything and asked for almost nothing in return. Emma closed her eyes, letting the sound of his heartbeat lull her toward rest. Tomorrow would bring fresh dangers, new challenges. Maddox was still out there, still hunting, but tonight, wrapped in the arms of a man who'd chosen to stand beside her, Emma let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found something worth fighting for. She was drifting toward sleep when she felt Will's lips brush her forehead, felt him whisper something too soft to make out. But Emma thought it might have been, "Stay with me," or perhaps, "You're safe now." It didn't matter which. Both were promises she desperately wanted to believe. Dawn came too soon, pale light creeping through the curtains to paint the room in shades of gray and gold. Emma woke to find herself alone in bed, Will already gone, though the pillow beside her still held the imprint of his head. She could hear voices downstairs, Will and Jenkins, discussing something in tones too low to distinguish words. Emma rose and dressed quickly, her body stiff from tension and fear. The locket Will had given her still hung around her neck, and she touched it briefly, drawing strength from the gift and what it represented. Family. Belonging. Trust. Downstairs, she found Will standing at the stove, making coffee with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. He looked up when she entered, and something passed between them, acknowledgement of the intimacy they'd shared, the barriers that had fallen in the night. "Morning," he said quietly. "Coffee's almost ready." "Thank you." Emma moved to help, needing the normalcy of routine. "Any news?" Will exchanged a glance with Jenkins, who stood by the window, rifle in hand. "Some. Davis spotted riders on the eastern ridge about an hour before dawn. They didn't approach, just watched. They're getting bolder." "Or they're waiting for something," Jenkins added grimly. "What do we do?" Emma asked, pouring coffee with hands that only trembled slightly. Will accepted the cup she offered, their fingers brushing briefly. "We end this, today. No more waiting for Maddox to make his move." He set down the coffee, turned to face Emma fully. "I'm riding to Copper Creek this morning, going to have a very public conversation with the sheriff about the wanted poster with your name on it." Emma's blood chilled. "Will, no. If you acknowledge it, if you admit you know, I'm going to tear it up," Will continued, his voice hard as iron, "right there on Main Street, in front of God and everyone. And then I'm going to make it very clear that Emma Carver is under my protection, that any attempt to collect bounty on a false warrant will be met with the full force of the law, my law." "That's a declaration of war," Jenkins said, voicing what Emma was thinking. "It is," Will agreed. "But Maddox has already declared war by killing Sam Porter, by sending men to terrorize my wife, by corrupting officials in my territory. I'm just making the terms explicit. He wants Emma, he goes through me, and he better bring an army, because I don't intend to go down easy." Emma set down her own coffee, her hand shaking too badly to hold it steady. "This is madness. You're one man, Will, one marshal against however many hired guns Maddox can afford. The math doesn't work in our favor." Will crossed to her, took her hands in his. "Emma, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about protecting you anymore, though that's reason enough. This is about what kind of man I am, what kind of marshal. If I let Maddox operate in my territory with impunity, if I let corruption and murder go unchecked because I'm afraid of the consequences, then I'm not worth the badge I wear." His grip tightened. "I'd rather die standing for what's right than live compromised. And I need to know you understand that you're prepared for what might come." Emma looked into his eyes and saw the absolute conviction there, the unshakable moral code that defined him. This was who Will Carver was, a man who drew lines and held them, regardless of cost. It was what made him a good marshal, a good man, and it was what might get him killed. "I understand," she whispered. "I don't like it, but I understand." "Good." Will released her hands, stepped back to business mode with visible effort. "Jenkins, I want you here with Emma. Davis will ride with me into town. We need witnesses to what I'm about to do. If things go wrong, if I don't come back by sunset, you take Emma and ride hard for the territorial capital. There's a marshal there named Harding, owes me his life from the war. You give him this." Will pulled an envelope from his pocket, sealed and addressed. "Everything's in there. Maddox's operation, the corruption, all of it. Harding will make sure it gets to people who can act on it." "Will, please," Emma started, but he cut her off gently. "This is precaution, nothing more. I intend to come back, Emma, but I'd be a fool not to plan for other possibilities." He settled his hat on his head, checked his gun one final time. "Keep the doors locked. Trust no one but Jenkins. And Emma—" He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features. "No matter what happens, know that these past few days, getting to know who you really are, building something real between us. It's been worth every bit of trouble that came with it. Then he was kissing her, and this time it wasn't the chaste press of lips from their wedding. This was desperate and fierce, a claiming and a goodbye wrapped into one. Emma kissed him back with everything she had, trying to pour months of gratitude and days of growing affection into the contact, trying to make him understand that he'd become more to her than just salvation. When Will pulled away, his eyes were dark with emotion. "Wait for me," he said simply. Then he was gone, riding toward Copper Creek with Davis at his side, and Emma was left standing in the doorway, watching the two riders grow smaller against the vast prairie until they disappeared entirely. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emma tried to occupy herself with household tasks, but everything felt pointless, trivial. She baked bread she couldn't eat, mended clothes that didn't need mending, scrubbed floors already clean. Jenkins kept watch from various windows, his young face drawn with worry, saying little but radiating tension. It was mid-afternoon when they heard the first gunshots, distant pops carried on the wind from the direction of town. Emma froze, a plate half-dried in her hands, listening. More shots, rapid fire, the unmistakable sound of a gunfight. "That's the Copper Creek direction," Jenkins said, already moving toward the door. "No." Emma caught his arm. "Will said to stay here, to protect me." "But the marshal would skin you alive for abandoning your post, and you know it." Emma forced strength into her voice she didn't feel. "We wait. We trust that Will knows what he's doing." So they waited, every minute an eternity, the silence after the gunshot somehow worse than the sound itself. Emma found herself touching the locket at her throat repeatedly, a talisman against fear, a reminder of the man who'd given it to her. The sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and gold when they finally heard hoofbeats. Emma's heart leaped. One rider, coming fast. Too few to be a posse, too fast to be casual. Jenkins raised his rifle, positioned himself by the window. The rider came into view, and Emma's breath left her in a rush. Will, alone, hunched slightly in the saddle, but alive. Jenkins was out the door before Emma could stop him, helping Will dismount, and Emma saw why he'd hunched, blood staining his shirt, his left arm hanging at an awkward angle. "Will!" Emma ran to him, her hands fluttering uselessly, afraid to touch him, afraid of causing more damage. "I'm all right," Will said, though his face was pale, his breathing labored. "Flesh wound mostly. Arm might be broken, but I can still use it if I have to." Jenkins helped him inside, and Emma was already tearing sheets for bandages, boiling water, gathering the medical supplies she'd found her first day in the house. Her hands shook, but she forced them steady as she cut away Will's shirt, exposing the damage. A bullet grazed along his ribs, ugly and bleeding, but not life-threatening. His left arm was swelling rapidly, purple bruises already blooming, broken, as he'd suspected, or at least badly sprained. But he was alive. He was here. "What happened?" Emma asked as she cleaned the wound, trying to keep her touch gentle despite her trembling hands. Will winced as she pressed a cloth against the graze. "I did what I said I would. Tore up that wanted poster right there on Main Street. Maddox's men didn't take kindly to it. 5 of them, opened fire in broad daylight." His jaw clenched. "Didn't care who else got hit, who got caught in the crossfire. That's when I knew for certain what kind of man we're dealing with." "You're lucky you're not dead," Jenkins muttered. "Luck had nothing to do with it. Davis took a bullet meant for me. He'll be fine, Doc says, but he's out of commission for a while. Eat this. And I had help from unexpected quarters." Will looked at Emma, something meaningful in his gaze. "Turns out not everyone in Copper Creek is on Maddox's payroll. Some folks took exception to hired guns shooting up their town. Sheriff Dawson especially. He might have been bought once, but seeing children nearly caught in that gunfire changed his mind real quick." Emma finished bandaging his ribs and moved to his arm, probing gently. Will hissed in pain, and she murmured an apology. "Is it over then? Did you get them?" 3 dead, 2 ran. But Emma, before they died, one of them talked. Told me things about Maddox's operation that change everything. Will caught her hand, held it despite the pain the movement caused. "Maddox isn't just after you for the debt. He's using the hunt for you as cover for something bigger, moving contraband through Colorado territory. using the search for a fugitive woman to justify sending men west, establishing networks. You were never the real goal. You were just the excuse. Understanding dawned, cold and bitter. So I'm not even important enough to hunt. I'm just convenient. You're important to me, Will said fiercely, and that makes you Maddox's problem. Because now I'm not just protecting my wife, I'm dismantling his entire Western operation, every contact, every corrupt official, every illegal enterprise. I'm burning it all down, and I'm using what that dying man told me to do it. Emma stared at him, this man who'd taken her desperate flight and turned it into a crusade against corruption. Will, that's suicide. If Maddox finds out you know about his larger operation, then he'll come for me directly instead of sending hired help, and I'll be ready. Will's good hand came up to cup her face. Emma, I told you. I'd rather die standing for what's right than live compromised. This is me standing. This is me fighting for something that matters. For you, for this territory, for every person Maddox has hurt or threatened or corrupted. Jenkins cleared his throat. Marshal, with respect, you can't even hold a gun right now. Your shooting arm's busted. Will's smile was grim. Then I better hope my enemies come from the left. Or better yet, I better make sure my wife can shoot straight enough to cover my weak side. Emma felt the weight of that settle on her shoulders, not burden, but purpose. Will was offering her a role in this fight, treating her as partner rather than victim. It terrified her. It also made her feel more alive than she had in months. All right, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Then you better teach me to shoot with both hands, because if we're doing this, if we're really standing against Maddox, I'm not hiding behind you. I'm standing beside you. Will's eyes blazed with something fierce and proud. That's my girl. And despite everything, the fear, the pain, the impossible odds, Emma felt herself smile. The days that followed the gunfight blurred together in a haze of preparation and watchful waiting. Will's arm healed slowly, the break clean enough that Doc Harrison predicted full recovery within 6 weeks. But 6 weeks was a luxury they didn't have, and both Emma and Will knew it. Maddox wouldn't wait for convenient timing to make his next move. True to his word, Will taught Emma to shoot with both hands. Each afternoon, when the worst of his pain had ebbed, they'd go behind the barn where Emma would practice until her shoulders ached and her ears rang despite the cotton stuffing. Will was a patient teacher even when frustrated by his own limitations, guiding her through the mechanics of drawing, aiming, firing with either hand. You're favoring your right, Will observed one afternoon, watching her empty a cylinder at the tin cans lined up on the fence. Your left hand is just as capable. You're just not trusting it yet. Emma lowered the pistol, her arms trembling with fatigue. It feels wrong, like writing with the wrong hand. That's because you're thinking too much. Shooting isn't about thought when it matters. It's about instinct, muscle memory. Will moved behind her, his good arm coming around to adjust her stance. Despite weeks of proximity, his touch still sent awareness skittering down her spine. Stop trying to control everything. Just feel it. Emma closed her eyes, letting her body find the position without her mind interfering. When she opened them and raised the pistol with her left hand, something clicked into place. The shot rang out, and the center can jumped, tumbling backward off the fence. There, Will said, satisfaction warming his voice. That's what I'm talking about. Again. She practiced until the sun started its descent toward the horizon, until she could draw and fire with either hand without conscious thought. It wasn't mastery. That would take years she didn't have, but it was competence. It was enough to make a difference when the moment came, because the moment was coming. They both felt it in the waiting silence, in the 2 quiet nights when no riders appeared but the threat of them hung heavy as storm clouds. Maddox was planning something, gathering his forces for a final confrontation. The question wasn't if, but when and how. The answer came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the shootout in Copper Creek. Jenkins rode in hard just after dawn, his horse lathered with sweat, his face grim with news Emma could read before he spoke a word. "They're coming," he said, dismounting in a rush. "Marshal, Davis got word from a contact in Denver. Maddox himself is on his way, left St. Louis 4 days ago with at least a dozen men. They'll be here by tomorrow night, maybe sooner if they ride hard." Will absorbed this with the stone-faced calm Emma had learned meant he was thinking furiously, calculating odds and strategies. How reliable is this information? Davis trusts his source absolutely, says the man's never been wrong before. Jenkins glanced at Emma, worry evident in his young features. Marshal, a dozen men, even with the deputies we've got, those aren't good odds. No, Will agreed. They're not, which is why we're not going to fight on Maddox's terms. He turned to Emma, and she saw the plan forming in his eyes even before he spoke. Emma, how well do you remember the layout of that dress shop in St. Louis, the one where you worked? The question caught her off guard. Well enough, I suppose. Why? Because Maddox is a businessman, and businessmen keep records, account books, ledgers, correspondence, evidence of everything they do, legal and otherwise. Will's intensity sharpened. If we can prove his illegal operations, get that evidence to the territorial marshal, we don't have to outgun him. We just have to outlast him long enough for the law to catch up. Emma's mind raced. You think he kept records of the debt? Of the threats? I think men like Maddox always keep records. It's how they maintain control, how they prove what's owed when someone tries to cheat them. Will began pacing, his injured arm held carefully against his ribs. The dress shop owner, you said she was connected to Maddox. What if she was more than connected? What if she was helping him run money through legitimate businesses, using the shop as a front? Understanding bloomed, cold and clarifying. Mrs. Henderson. She had files in the back office, ledgers she kept locked away. I always thought it was just business records, but it could have been Maddox's records, his real accounts, the ones showing the scope of his operation. Will stopped pacing, faced her directly. Emma, if we could get those records, if we could prove what he's really doing, we'd have enough to bring federal marshals down on him. Not just for the debt collection and threats, but for fraud, racketeering, maybe even murder. Jenkins looked between them, confused. How does that help us right now? Those records are in St. Louis, a week's ride away, even if we pushed hard. Will's smile was sharp as a knife edge. Not if Maddox brought them with him. A man that meticulous, that controlled, he wouldn't leave evidence like that unguarded, especially not when he's riding into hostile territory. He'd keep it close, keep it protected. You want to rob Victor Maddox? Emma said slowly, the audacity of it stealing her breath. While he's here hunting me, you want to steal the very evidence that could destroy him. I want to give him a choice, Will corrected. Give up his pursuit of you and leave Colorado territory permanently, or face federal charges that'll see him hanged. Either way, you're free, and he's finished. The plan was insane. It was also possibly the only thing that might actually work. But the risks, Emma couldn't even begin to calculate them all. Will, if this goes wrong, if he catches you trying to steal from him, then I'll die doing what I swore to do, protecting the people in my territory from men who think money and violence put them above the law. Will crossed to her, took her hands in his one good one. Emma, I know the risks, I know what I'm asking, but this is the only way I see to end this without a bloodbath. Maddox wants you? Fine. He can have a meeting with you, a very public meeting in Copper Creek, with witnesses and the territorial marshal I've already sent for, and while he's distracted with that, we get the evidence we need to bury him. You're using me as bait, Emma said, though there was no accusation in it, just understanding. I'm asking you to be brave one more time, to stand in front of the man who terrifies you and not flinch, knowing I've got your back. Will's thumb brushed across her knuckles. But Emma, I need you to understand, this only works if you agree. If you can't face Maddox, if the fear is too much, we'll find another way. We'll run if we have to, keep running until... No! Emma's voice was stronger than she expected. No more running. You're right. This is the only way to truly end it. I'll do it. I'll face him. Will's eyes searched hers, looking for doubt, for hesitation. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. All right then, we've got until tomorrow night to prepare. Jenkins, I need you to ride to every deputy, every man we can trust between here and the territorial line. Tell them to be in Copper Creek tomorrow evening, armed and ready. We're going to make sure Maddox understands exactly what kind of welcome awaits him. The next day and a half passed in a flurry of preparation. Word spread through Copper Creek. The marshal's fugitive wife was going to face her accuser publicly, let the law decide her fate. It was the kind of dramatic confrontation that drew crowds, exactly what Will was counting on. The more witnesses, the less likely Maddox would simply gun them down in the street. Emma spent the time memorizing every detail Will told her about how to act, what to say, how to buy them the time they needed. She also spent it coming to terms with the very real possibility that tomorrow might be her last day alive. Maddox wasn't known for mercy, and even surrounded by law and witnesses, desperate men did desperate things. That final night, Emma found herself unable to sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Downstairs, Will was supposed to be resting his arm, gathering strength for tomorrow. But Emma could hear him moving around, restless as she was. She rose, pulled on her robe, and descended the stairs quietly. Will stood at the window, silhouetted against the moonlight, his injured arm still bound close to his chest. He turned when he heard her, and even in the dim light, Emma could see the weight of tomorrow on his shoulders. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. "Too much thinking." Will turned back to the window, to the prairie silver-painted under the moon. "I keep running through everything that could go wrong, every way this plan could fall apart." Emma moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "And I keep coming back to the same conclusion. It's still our best chance. Maybe our only chance." He was quiet for a moment. "Emma, I need to tell you something. In case tomorrow goes wrong, in case I don't get the chance later." Emma's heart clenched. Don't. Don't do the goodbye speech. We're both walking out of this tomorrow. We have to believe that." "I do believe it, but I also believe in speaking truth while I can." Will turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made Emma's breath catch. "When you stepped off that train, I thought I was getting a convenient arrangement. A wife to manage the house, share the burden, keep the loneliness at bay. I thought I knew exactly what I was signing up for." "Will, I was wrong," he continued, his voice rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "What I got was a woman who's braver than she knows, stronger than she believes, and honest enough to admit when she's lying. I got someone who makes me want to be better than I am, who makes this house feel like a home instead of just shelter." His hand came up to cup her face, calloused and warm. "I got someone I'm falling in love with, Emma. Maybe already have fallen, and I need you to know that, need you to hear it, in case tomorrow steals my chance to say it again." The words hit Emma like a physical force, stealing her breath and her defenses in one blow. She'd known he cared. That much had been evident in every choice he'd made, every risk he'd taken. But love, that was something else entirely, something she'd never thought to deserve, especially not from a man as fundamentally good as Will Carver. "You can't love me," she whispered, though her heart screamed that she wanted him to. "You barely know me, the real me. I know you were willing to sell yourself into what amounted to servitude to escape a debt that wasn't your fault. I know you chose truth over safety when you could have kept lying. I know you've learned to shoot with both hands in 3 weeks because you refuse to be helpless. I know you face nightmares every night and still get up every morning ready to fight." Will's thumb brushed her cheek. "I know enough, Emma. I know everything that matters." Emma felt tears slip free, couldn't stop them even if she'd wanted to. "I'm going to get you killed. Loving me, protecting me, it's going to cost you everything." "Then it'll be worth the price." Because Emma, living without purpose, without something worth fighting for, that's not living at all. That's just existing, and I'm done existing. He pulled her closer until their foreheads touched. "I'd rather have one day of loving you and fighting beside you than a lifetime of safety and loneliness." The dam broke. Emma closed the distance between them, kissing Will with everything she had, all the fear and gratitude and growing love she'd been too afraid to acknowledge. He responded immediately, his good arm pulling her tight against him, the kiss deepening into something desperate and claiming. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Will rested his forehead against hers again. "Stay with me tonight," he said, the words half request, half plea. "Not because we're afraid, not because tomorrow's uncertain, but because this is real, what's between us, and I want to wake up beside my wife at least once before we face whatever comes." Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. She took his hand and led him upstairs to the bedroom they'd been dancing around for weeks. There was nothing frantic or desperate in how they came together, just a slow revelation of trust and tenderness, two broken people finding wholeness in each other despite impossible circumstances. Afterward, Emma lay with her head on Will's chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling more at peace than she'd ever thought possible. "I love you too," she whispered into the darkness. I fought it, told myself it was just gratitude or fear or desperation. But Will, I love you, and if tomorrow's all we get, at least we'll have had this. Will's arm tightened around her. Tomorrow's not all we get. We're going to win, Emma. We're going to walk out of this together, and then we're going to build the life we should have had from the start. I promise you that. Emma wanted to believe him. She let herself believe him just for these few hours before dawn, when promises were easier to make than keep. They dozed fitfully, waking with the first light of morning tangled together, reluctant to face the day but knowing delay would only make it harder. Will rose first, wincing as his injured arm protested movement, and began the methodical process of preparing for battle, checking weapons, loading extra ammunition, strapping on the gun belt he wore like a second skin. Emma dressed carefully, choosing the dark blue dress she'd worn for their wedding. If today was going to be performance, she wanted to look the part of the respectable marshal's wife, someone who'd committed no real crimes, someone deserving of protection under the law. They ate breakfast in silence, the weight of what was coming stealing appetite and words alike. Jenkins arrived as they were finishing, accompanied by Davis, still pale from his wound but insisting on being there, and 3 other deputies Emma recognized from around town. "The others are already in Copper Creek," Jenkins reported, "positioned around the saloon like you asked. Sheriff Dawson's got men on the rooftops, and the territorial marshal arrived last night. Place is locked down tight as we can make it." "Good." Will stood, favoring his injured side. "Emma rides with me. The rest of you spread out, come in from different directions. I want Maddox to see we've got numbers, but I don't want to spook him into running before we can spring the trap." "And if he brings more men than we can handle?" Davis asked, ever practical. "Then we improvise." Will's smile was grim. "Wouldn't be the first time." The ride to Copper Creek felt surreal, like watching herself from a distance. Emma sat beside Will in the wagon, his good hand occasionally finding hers, squeezing reassurance neither of them quite believed. The prairie stretched endless around them, beautiful and indifferent to human drama, and Emma found herself memorizing details, the way sunlight turned the grass to gold, the distant mountains purple against the sky, the particular warmth of Will's hand in hers. If these were her last hours, at least they'd be spent beside someone she loved, fighting for something that mattered. Copper Creek came into view, and Emma's chest tightened. The town looked normal on the surface, people going about their business, horses tied at hitching posts, the usual commerce of a frontier settlement. But Emma could see the tension underneath, the way people moved a little faster, the way hands hovered near weapons, the careful watching that suggested everyone knew something was about to break. Will pulled the wagon up in front of the saloon, the largest building in town, the most public space available. He climbed down carefully, then helped Emma, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. "Remember the plan," he said quietly. "Keep him talking, keep him focused on you. The moment you see me signal, you drop to the ground. Don't hesitate, don't think, just drop." Emma nodded, her mouth too dry for words. Will led her inside the saloon, which had been cleared of its usual patrons. Only Sheriff Dawson stood at the bar, and a tall man Emma didn't recognize wearing a territorial marshal's badge. Harding, she assumed, Will's friend from the war. "He's been spotted," Harding said without preamble. 5 miles out, riding hard with about 15 men. Be here within the hour." 15. Will's jaw clenched. He brought an army. He brought everyone he could trust, which means he's planning to end this today, one way or another. Harding's eyes found Emma, and she saw sympathy there and respect. "Ma'am, you don't have to do this. We can find another way." "No," Emma said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "We can't. This is the only way to truly finish it." The next 45 minutes stretched into eternity. Emma stood by the window watching the road while Will gave final instructions to his deputies. The plan was simple in theory, dangerously complicated in execution. Emma would face Maddox publicly, in front of witnesses that included 2 marshals and a sheriff. While Maddox was distracted with his victory, believing he'd finally cornered his prey, Will and several deputies would search the hotel where Maddox's men had taken rooms looking for the evidence they needed. It required split-second timing, absolute trust, and a degree of luck Emma wasn't sure they possessed. But it was the plan they had, and they'd committed to it. The sound of multiple horses approaching made everyone tense. Emma's heart hammered as she watched them come into view, Victor Maddox at the lead, exactly as she remembered him. Tall, well-dressed, moving with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. Behind him rode the hired guns, hard men with dead eyes, the kind who killed for money and slept soundly after. Will's hand found Emma's shoulder, squeezed once. "You can do this. Just remember, I'm right here. I've got you." Then Maddox was dismounting, was walking toward the saloon, and Emma was moving toward the door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk, into the afternoon sunlight, and faced the man who'd haunted her nightmares for months. Maddox stopped when he saw her, genuine surprise flickering across his face before he masked it with cold satisfaction. "Well, well. Emma Hartley. I have to say, you led us on quite a chase." Emma lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of courage Will had helped her find. "My name is Emma Carver, and you have no claim on me." "Your name is whatever I say it is, girl. You owe me $20,000, plus interest, plus the considerable expense of tracking you across half the country." Maddox's smile was shark-like. "But I'm a reasonable man. We can work something out. You come with me, we'll discuss repayment terms." "She's not going anywhere with you." Will stepped out of the saloon, and Emma heard the ripple of movement as deputies positioned themselves around the street, visible and armed. "Emma Carver is a citizen of Colorado Territory, under the protection of the law. Whatever claims you think you have, you can take them up through proper legal channels." Maddox's eyes narrowed, assessing Will, the deputies, the odds. "Marshal Carver, I've heard about you. Word is you've got a hero complex, taking in strays and lost causes. But you're out of your depth here. This is business, and business doesn't concern frontier lawmen." "Murder concerns me," Will said flatly. "Sam Porter, the telegraph operator. 3 hired guns who won't see another sunrise. Those deaths are on you, Maddox, and that makes you my business." "Prove it." Maddox's confidence didn't waver. "Show me evidence linking me to any of those deaths. Show me anything more than speculation and a marshal's wounded pride." This was the moment. Emma saw Will's hand move in the signal they'd practiced, a slight gesture, barely noticeable. "Time to move." "Actually," Emma said, stepping forward, drawing Maddox's attention back to her, "we can prove quite a lot. Did you know Mrs. Henderson kept copies of your correspondence? Every threat, every illegal transaction, every business you've corrupted, she documented it all. Said it was insurance, in case you ever turned on her the way you've turned on others." It was a bluff. They had no such evidence yet. But Emma saw Maddox's face change, saw the flicker of doubt, of anger, of calculation, and she knew the lie had struck home. "You're lying," but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Am I? Why don't you check your files, the ones you brought with you, see if anything's missing?" Emma's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "We've been busy while you've been traveling, Mr. Maddox, very busy." Maddox's hand dropped to his gun, and everything happened at once. Deputies stepped from doorways, rifles raised. Maddox's men drew weapons, and suddenly the street was a powder keg, one spark from exploding into violence. "Stand down!" Harding's voice rang out, authoritative and commanding. "Territorial Marshal Harding, you're surrounded, outgunned, and under arrest for multiple counts of murder, fraud, and corruption. Tell your men to drop their weapons, or this ends badly for everyone." Maddox looked around, seemed to truly see for the first time how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. Deputies on rooftops, in doorways, behind water troughs, 20 armed men to his 15, with position and preparation on their side. But Emma saw the moment desperation overtook calculation in Maddox's eyes, saw him make the choice that would damn him. His gun cleared leather, swinging toward her, and Emma's training took over. She dropped, just as Will had taught her, heard the crack of gunfire above her head. Then the world erupted into chaos. Will's gun barked, and Maddox staggered back, blood blooming on his shoulder. Return fire came from Maddox's men, and deputies answered with disciplined volleys. Emma pressed herself against the ground, covering her head, listening to the thunder of guns and the screams of men and horses. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, an eternity compressed into heartbeats. Then silence, broken only by groans and the settling of dust. Emma raised her head cautiously. Bodies littered the street. Maddox's men, mostly, cut down by superior numbers and better positioning. A few deputies were down, but Emma could see them moving, being tended to by others. Not dead. Please God, not dead. She scrambled to her feet, searching frantically for Will, found him standing over Maddox, his smoking gun still trained on the man who'd terrorized her for so long. Maddox clutched his wounded shoulder, his face ashen, his expensive clothes ruined by blood and dirt. "It's over," Will said, and the finality in his voice made it truth. "You're done, Maddox. Every man here is a witness to you drawing first, attempting murder. Add that to whatever evidence we find in your hotel room, and you'll hang before summer's out." Maddox looked up at him, then at Emma, and something crumbled in his expression. The confidence, the power, the untouchable arrogance, all of it bleeding away like the blood from his shoulder. "I want a lawyer," he managed. "I have rights. You have the right to shut your mouth before I remember how close you came to killing my wife." Will interrupted coldly. "Dawson, get him secured. Harding, send men to search his hotel room. I want every scrap of paper, every ledger, everything he brought with him." As deputies moved to comply, Will finally lowered his gun and turned to Emma. The relief in his face nearly broke her. He crossed to her in 3 strides, pulled her against him with his good arm, buried his face in her hair. "You were perfect," he murmured. "So brave, God, Emma, when he drew on you. But he missed. You didn't." Emma pulled back to look at him, to assure herself he was whole, unhurt. "It worked, Will. The plan worked." "Most of it." Will's expression turned grim as he looked at the bodies in the street, at the wounded being carried into Doc Harrison's office. "Cost more than I wanted. Deputy Miller's dead, Harrison too. Good men, both of them." Emma felt the weight of those deaths settle on her shoulders alongside Sam Porter's. More lives lost because she'd run, because she'd been desperate enough to bring her trouble to Copper Creek. The guilt would haunt her, she knew, add itself to the nightmares she already carried. But it was over. Finally, truly over. The rest of the day passed in a blur of statements and documentation. Harding's men found exactly what Will had predicted in Maddox's hotel room. Ledgers detailing years of illegal operations, correspondence with corrupt officials, evidence of fraud and racketeering spanning multiple territories. It was enough to hang Maddox 3 times over, enough to bring down his entire organization. By evening, Maddox and his surviving men were locked in Copper Creek's small jail, awaiting transport to the territorial prison. Emma stood on the saloon porch, watching the sun set over the prairie, feeling hollowed out and strangely peaceful. Will found her there, slipped his good arm around her waist, pulled her close. They stood in silence, watching gold bleed to purple to black, watching stars emerge one by one in the vast sky. "What happens now?" Emma asked finally. "Now? Now we bury our dead. We rebuild what was broken. We send Maddox to trial and watch him hang." Will paused. "And then we go home, Emma. We go home and build the life we should have had from the start." "Just like that? After everything?" "Not just like that. It'll take time, healing, learning to live without looking over our shoulders." Will turned her to face him, and in the lamplight spilling from the saloon, Emma saw everything she needed in his eyes. "But we'll do it together, as partners, as husband and wife, as 2 people who found each other in the worst possible way and somehow made it work anyway." Emma reached up to touch his face, this man who'd saved her in every way that mattered. "I love you, Will Carver. I should have said it sooner, should have trusted it sooner, but I'm saying it now, and I'll keep saying it for the rest of our lives if you'll let me." "I'll let you." Will's smile was soft, genuine, the expression of a man who'd finally found his way home. "I'll let you say it every day for the next 50 years, and it still won't be enough." He kissed her then, gentle and claiming at once, a promise of the future they'd fought so hard to reach. Around them, Copper Creek settled into evening routine, people returning to normal life now that the threat had passed. Tomorrow there would be funerals and trials and the hard work of recovery. But tonight, in this moment, Emma let herself simply be. Emma Carver, wife to a good man, survivor of her own story, no longer running, but finally, blessedly home. They walked back to the ranch under starlight, the wagon creaking companionably beneath them, the prairie vast and quiet around them. Jenkins and Davis had offered to stand watch, to give them one night without worry, and Emma was grateful for their discretion and their friendship. The house looked different in the moonlight, not just shelter anymore, but home. Their home, built on truth finally, on love hard won and trust earned. Will helped Emma down from the wagon, and she noticed he moved easier now, the adrenaline of the day finally fading to let pain back in. She'd need to check his injuries, make sure nothing had torn loose during the fighting, but first she just wanted to be close to him, to reassure herself that they'd both survived. Inside, Will lit the lamp while Emma put water on for coffee neither of them would probably drink. Domestic normalcy, the kind she'd dreamed of but never quite believed she'd have. It felt surreal, precious, fragile as spun glass. "Will," she said, turning to find him watching her with an expression she was learning to recognize as tenderness mixed with wonder. "What you said about building a life, what does that look like to you? Really?" He considered the question seriously, as he did everything. "Honestly? I see us working this ranch together. You managing the books and correspondence, me handling the physical labor as my arm heals. Maybe I keep the marshal's badge, maybe I don't. Depends on whether you can stand worrying about me riding into danger." "I can stand it," Emma said, "if you can stand me worrying." "Deal." Will's smile was crooked, charming. "I see us maybe adding to this house, making room for possibilities. I see quiet mornings and hard work and coming home to you every night. I see simple things, Emma, honest things. The kind of life I never thought I deserved until you showed me otherwise." Emma's throat tightened. "That sounds perfect. All of it." They stood looking at each other across the kitchen, and Emma felt the last pieces of her old life. Emma Hartley, the frightened fugitive, finally fall away. She was Emma Carver now, truly and completely. Not because a preacher said words or a legal document bore her signature, but because she'd chosen this life, this man, this future, and fought for it with everything she had. Will crossed to her, wincing slightly as his injuries protested. Emma's hands went to his shirt, carefully unbuttoning it, checking the bandages she'd applied that morning. The wound along his ribs had bled some during the fighting, but not badly. His arm was swollen, but stable. "I'm all right," Will murmured, his good hand coming up to still hers. "Emma, I'm all right." "I know, I just need to see it, to know for sure." Emma looked up at him, saw understanding in his eyes. "I keep thinking about how close we came, how easily I could have lost you today." "But you didn't. We're both here, both whole enough." Will's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "And tomorrow we'll be even more whole, and the day after that better still. That's how healing works, Emma. Increments, small steps toward something better." Emma nodded, blinking back tears she refused to shed. She'd cried enough over the past months, tears of fear, of grief, of desperation. Tonight called for something different, something better. "Take me to bed," she said softly. "Not because we're afraid or desperate or trying to forget, but because we're alive, we're together, and I want to feel that, want to celebrate that." Will's eyes darkened with understanding and desire. He took her hand and led her upstairs to the bedroom that was finally, truly theirs. And there, in the quiet darkness broken only by moonlight through the window, they came together with the leisure of people who had time, who had a future, who had found in each other something worth every trial they'd endured to reach this moment. Later, Emma lay with her head on Will's chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling more at peace than she'd thought possible just weeks ago. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder, and Emma let herself drift in contentment. "Emma," Will said quietly, "I need to tell you something. About the war. About what I did that still haunts me." Emma tensed slightly. "You don't have to." "I do. If we're building this on truth, you deserve to know all of it." Will took a breath, and Emma felt the tension coil in him. I told you I did things I'm not proud of. What I didn't tell you is that I led a raid on a civilian town. We'd had intelligence that Confederate sympathizers were using it to hide supplies, funnel weapons. Intelligence that turned out to be wrong. Emma's heart ached for the pain in his voice. Will, we burned half the town before we realized. Homes, businesses, a church. No one died, thank God, but we destroyed lives that night, destroyed trust. And I led that raid, Emma. I gave the orders. That blood, that destruction. It's on my hands. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this revelation. Then she shifted to look at him, to meet his eyes in the dimness. And after? After you learned the truth? I tried to make it right, sent money anonymously to help rebuild, testified against the officer who'd given us false intelligence. But it doesn't change what I did, doesn't erase the harm. Will's voice was rough with old pain. I came back here thinking I could outrun it, could bury it in hard work and frontier justice. But guilt doesn't work that way. No, Emma agreed. It doesn't. But Will, you've spent the years since trying to be better, to use your authority to protect instead of destroy. Doesn't that count for something? I'd like to think so. But I also know I'm the last person who should judge anyone for running from their past, for lying to survive. Will's hand found hers, laced their fingers together. That's why I understood you, Emma, why I couldn't condemn you for doing what you had to do. We're both carrying things, both trying to be better than our worst moments. Emma brought his hand to her lips, kissed his knuckles gently. Then we'll carry them together. Your guilt and mine, your past and mine. And we'll keep trying to be better, keep choosing the right path even when it's hard. That's all anyone can do, Will. That's all anyone can ask. She felt some of the tension leave him, saw in his eyes that her acceptance meant something, eased some burden he'd been carrying alone for too long. They held each other in the quiet darkness, two wounded souls finding healing in shared understanding and stubborn hope. Thank you, Will whispered, for not seeing me differently now. For not what? For not recognizing that you're human, that you make mistakes, that you carry scars like everyone else? Emma shook her head. Will, I love you, all of you, including the parts you think are broken or shameful. That's what love is. Seeing someone completely and choosing them anyway. Will pulled her closer, buried his face in her hair. I don't deserve you. Good thing love isn't about deserving then. It's about choosing, and I choose you. Every day, every moment, for the rest of our lives. They slept eventually, tangled together, two people who'd found in each other something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. And when morning came, soft and golden through the window, Emma woke to find Will already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. Morning, he said softly. How are you feeling? Emma took inventory, her body pleasantly sore, her mind clearer than it had been in months, her heart fuller than she'd thought possible. Good, really good actually. How's your arm? Hurts like hell, but I'll live. Will's smile was wry. Doc says another 4 weeks and I should have full use back. Until then, I'm afraid you're stuck doing most of the heavy lifting around here. I think I can manage that. Emma stretched, reluctant to leave the warmth of the bed and Will's presence. What's the plan for today? Well, we've got funerals this afternoon for Miller and Harrison. Need to pay our respects. Support their families. Will's expression sobered. And I need to meet with Harding, go over the evidence against Maddox, make sure everything's documented properly for trial. Emma nodded, the weight of reality settling back onto her shoulders. Freedom had a price, and they'd paid it in blood and grief. The least she could do was face the consequences with grace. After that, though, Will continued, his hand finding hers under the blankets, I thought maybe we could start talking about the future. Real plans, Emma. Where we go from here, what we build, how we make this life of ours into something worth all the trouble it took to get here. Emma smiled, feeling hope bloom warm and bright in her chest. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. They rose and dressed, prepared for the day ahead with the comfortable coordination of partners who'd learned to move around each other, to anticipate needs and offer support without asking. The coffee was strong, the breakfast simple but filling, and Emma found herself grateful for the ordinary routines that anchored them to this new reality. The funerals were somber affairs, the entire town turning out to honor the men who'd died defending Copper Creek from Maddox's invasion. Emma stood beside Will, his hand warm in hers, listening to words about sacrifice and duty and the price of standing for what's right. She wept for men she'd barely known who'd died because she'd brought danger to their doorstep. But she also wept for relief, for freedom, for the future that their deaths had purchased. Afterward, at the small cemetery on the edge of town, Sarah Porter approached Emma. The widow looked older than when Emma had met her weeks ago, grief aging her in ways time alone couldn't account for. "Mrs. Carver," she said quietly, "I wanted to thank you." Emma blinked in confusion. "Thank me?" "Mrs. Porter, I'm so sorry about Sam. If I hadn't come here, my Sam would still be dead, just from different hands and for different reasons." Sarah's voice was firm despite the tears on her cheeks. "Those men, Maddox's men, they would have found some other excuse to kill, some other victim to terrorize. At least this way his death mattered. At least it helped stop them from hurting anyone else." Emma didn't know what to say, overwhelmed by this grace she didn't deserve. Sarah reached out and squeezed her hand once. "You're not responsible for evil men doing evil things," Sarah said. "You're just responsible for how you respond. And from what I hear, you responded with courage and truth. Sam would have approved of that." She walked away before Emma could respond, leaving Emma standing there with tears streaming down her face and Will's arm coming around her shoulders, steady and supporting. "She's right, you know," Will murmured. "None of this was your fault, Emma. The debt, the threats, the violence, that was all Maddox. You just did what anyone would do. You tried to survive. I brought it here, though. To you, to this town. And now it's ended here. Maddox will hang, his organization will crumble, and dozens, maybe hundreds, of people won't fall victim to his schemes in the future. That's because of you, Emma. Because you had the courage to stop running and stand your ground." Emma leaned into Will's strength, letting his words sink in, wanting to believe them. Maybe, with time, she would. Maybe eventually the guilt would ease, would transform into something she could live with. A scar instead of an open wound. The meeting with Harding went long, lasting well into the evening. Emma sat beside Will in the marshal's office, listening as they went through the evidence piece by piece, building an ironclad case against Maddox. The ledgers alone were enough to convict him multiple times over, but Harding was thorough, leaving nothing to chance. "He'll try to buy his way out," Harding warned. "Men like Maddox always do. We need to make sure every official involved in this case is beyond reproach, beyond temptation." "Already taken care of," Will assured him. "The territorial judge assigned to this case is Judge Morrison, fought in the war, lost his son to profiteers. He's got no love for men like Maddox, and even less tolerance for corruption." Harding nodded approvingly. "Good. Then we've got him. Emma, you'll need to testify at trial. Give your account of Maddox's threats and the circumstances that led to your flight. Are you prepared for that?" Emma's stomach clenched at the thought of facing Maddox again, even in a courtroom surrounded by law and order, but she met Harding's gaze steadily. "I am. I'll tell the truth, all of it, whatever it takes to make sure he never hurts anyone else. That's all we can ask." Harding stood, extending his hand first to Will, then to Emma. "Marshal Carver, you did good work here. Took a personal situation and turned it into justice for a whole territory. That's the mark of a good lawman." Will shook his hand firmly. "Couldn't have done it without good people backing me up. Your help, Dawson's change of heart, the deputies who stood with us, that's what made the difference." After Harding left, Emma and Will sat for a moment in the quiet office, the weight of everything finally settling. It was truly over. Maddox was in chains, his operation dismantled, the threat neutralized. Emma could breathe without fear for the first time in so long she'd almost forgotten what that felt like. "Come on," Will said finally, standing and offering his hand. "Let's go home. We've done enough for one day." Home. The word resonated through Emma's chest like a bell, clear and true. Not a hiding place, not a refuge, but home. Where she belonged, with the man she loved, in the life they'd fought together to claim. They rode back to the ranch under a sky brilliant with stars, the prairie quiet around them, peaceful in a way Emma could finally appreciate. Will's hand found hers on the wagon seat, and they drove one-handed, connected. Two people who'd been through hell and somehow found each other on the other side. At the ranch, they tended the horses together, checked the chickens, did the evening chores side by side with the easy cooperation of true partners. Inside, Emma made dinner while Will dealt with paperwork at the kitchen table. His brow furrowed in concentration as he worked through reports she'd help him file tomorrow. "Will," Emma said as they sat down to eat, "earlier you mentioned making plans for the future. What kind of plans?" Will set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. "Well, I was thinking maybe we expand the cattle operation, bring in some good breeding stock. The ranch could support twice what we have now if we work it right." He paused. "And I was thinking maybe we convert the loft space into a proper second bedroom, for when we need it." Emma caught the implication, felt heat rise to her cheeks. "For when we need it." "For children, Emma. Someday, when we're ready. If you want that." Will's voice was tentative, hopeful. "I know we haven't talked about it, and there's no rush, but I hoped, maybe you'd want to build a family with me. A real one. Not just the two of us, but something bigger." Emma's heart swelled so full she thought it might burst. Children, family, the kind of future she'd stopped letting herself imagine when survival became her only goal. But now, looking at Will across their kitchen table, in their home, with their whole lives ahead of them, she let herself want it with fierce intensity. "I want that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I want everything with you, Will. The ranch, the family, the life. All of it." Will's smile could have lit the whole prairie. He stood, came around the table, and pulled Emma to her feet and into his arms. "Then we'll have it. We'll build it together, piece by piece, day by day. We'll make something so good, so solid, that all the pain it took to get here will seem worth it." Emma kissed him, pouring everything she felt into the contact. Love and gratitude and hope and promise. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling, lighter somehow, as if giving voice to their dreams had made them more real, more attainable. "There's one more thing," Will said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet pouch, opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "My mother's wedding ring. I should have given it to you before the ceremony, but everything happened so fast and I wasn't sure." He trailed off, then met her eyes. "Emma Carver, would you wear this? Not because you have to, not because papers say you're my wife, but because you want to be." Emma's vision blurred with tears as she held out her hand, watched Will slip the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, and Emma felt the significance of it settle into her bones. This was more than a symbol. This was a vow renewed, a choice made freely, love given and received without reservation. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it. To you, to us, to the life we're going to build. Yes, Will. Always yes." They stood there in their kitchen, hands clasped, hearts full. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and chosen, every day, to stay found. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and free, and inside, the future waited, uncertain in its details but sure in its foundation. Love, truth, partnership. The kind of life worth fighting for. And they'd fought for it, bled for it, nearly died for it. But they'd won. Together, they'd won everything that mattered. Emma smiled through her tears, felt Will's arms tighten around her, and knew with absolute certainty that every lie she'd told, every mile she'd run, every moment of terror she'd endured, all of it had been leading her here, to this man, this home, this hard-won happiness. She was Emma Carver now, truly and completely. Not running anymore, but standing. Not hiding, but living. Not alone, but loved beyond measure by a man who'd seen her at her worst and chosen her anyway. And that, Emma thought,